this.
The never-ending meeting.
That's right.
Has that ever happened before?
A never-ending meeting?
Yeah.
Probably. There's probably some meeting that's still been going on for.
Your 10 years?
I've had meetings that have continued for like a year. Like they just keep it open, and it's usually stuff like this. Like the county had one. It was on a ADU or a short-term rental thing, where the meeting just kept being continued because they didn't make a decision.
To answer your question, Dale, the conversation about Carmel should and should not be has been going on for over 100 years.
So that meeting.
That meeting.
Has been going on forever.
And,
It's just once in a while the document pops out.
That's right.
right, exactly.
At some point, somebody said, you've got to print something at some point.
Have a work product.
Yeah.
Morning.
Good morning.
So I have the chair.
Indiana Schmitz.
I took it to the upholstery shop right next to the
There it
shop.
is.
They're going to give us a quote.
Okay.
Here, I'll give you these.
Now, hello. Now we have a quorum.
These are two fabric samples that I actually have.
Given the style of the chair.
Since you're on the board, the other question is, basically, it's a piece of plywood kind of like fabric, so it's totally
Yeah.
different. He said originally that chair would have had something.
Yeah.
He's got it.
Yeah, have a little bit.
Give me a
Everybody ready for part 3?
chairs at their shops.
Okay, welcome everybody. We have some new participants. Welcome. Special welcome to the new participants. You're joining us in part 3 of one meeting. We don't know if this is the last part of this particular meeting, but for now it's 3 of 3. This was the first meeting originally that we had after the draft was released on February 9th. So there was a little digestion period, and then we met for the first time maybe a week and a half ago now. And then we met a couple days later to continue that meeting, and now this is the continuation of that continuation. And what I brought as chair to the first post-draft release meeting of this working group was the same document that we had been given, but rearranged with the same language, with no changes or anything, into groupings of concepts. So it wasn't just that this group, this community effort has come up with these 6 principles that we wanted to organize our thinking by, but also that there were a number of redundancies throughout, a very old document that had been added to and that had been combined from a part 1 of a design process and a part 2 into one document, which is something this community also wanted. So there was a number of places where, the same thing might have been said 5 different ways, sometimes almost exactly the same way. So that was all lumped together and kind of just ordered so that we could see where the content was, where the things change, where the subject changes, how we can evaluate the content. And then, starting on the second part of the continued meeting, I personally took a pass at trying to remove those redundancies in order to, for myself, maybe in large part, but maybe for everybody, to sort of see if I could understand where the meat of the value is, or the principle that was being espoused. So what we did in the second meeting, to recap, is just start looking at that. Because to me anyway, it was more easy to evaluate if we agreed with the content, once it was, briefly, concisely stated, and stated only once. So we got through two of our principles in the residential side only. Yes, go ahead, sure.
Just for those, the benefit of those that are joining, because I think it's worth mentioning that you did also add language too in the second pass, in the brevity edits. There's italicized language that you added for various reasons, but I think that's important to note too, that that's an add as well. in that
Yes, and I
second
was
round.
about to get to that.
Yeah.
So we got through two of those chapters, and I guess I'm calling them chapters. I don't know if they really are, but, and as we went through them, we paid special note to the italicized portions, which were places where, again, by my, flawed judgment, human flawed judgment, were changes to the language that were significant enough that they might have changed the meaning. Otherwise, if the thing was just rephrased grammatically, and I personally, in my own judgment, flawed as it is, thought, this is basically saying the same thing, then I didn't italicize it. So we went through the first two chapters that way, and then, and here's where the italics get even more interesting, as I promised to do at the last meeting, I had the benefit, as your secretary, of hearing what everyone's reactions were to the first draft. Everyone meaning the steering committee, folks on the Zoom, folks in the room. And so as I continued on the promised brevity exercise, I did also add in italics to the extent that I had notated myself, again, human flawed as it was, and totally provisional and up for discussion, areas that I thought the community wanted to discuss, wanted to alter, including members of the public that are on the steering committee. So you will see this is no longer just my rephrasing, but also things that I have picked up from you all. And again, the main purpose of this is so we can see it and talk about it more easily. Otherwise, I don't know how that would have been possible because of all the largeness of the document and the redundancies of the document. So I'm going to pause for a second and see if anyone has any special wishes for today, but we are still on item A, high-level discussion of the feedback for the design guideline first draft. I think if we were to keep on doing what we were doing in part 2 of the meeting, we would start at chapter 3 now, because that would be new to us all, and just try to keep going. Okay, Melanie.
Can I just ask for us to
give her
go
a
back
microphone.
to the very...
Oh, right, microphone for Mel, here.
Thank you. I don't- Is it on?
Yeah, I think it is.
Can we just go back to 2.6.5, and the very last part, we were talking about skylights?
Okay, but can I just ask you to
sure.
pause for 1 second? I wanted to just get people's reactions about that overview and just general direction for the day today, if anyone has any special, and then we'll go up
Sure.
to certain specific points. Go ahead, Ian.
I'm sorry that this is the only meeting I've been able to attend. The feedback session.
Grab the mic there, Ian.
Mike, Ian, please.
And I'd like to know, so anyway, I apologize for not being able to attend the other two meetings, but I'd like to know, have we gone into the commercial design guidelines yet?
Good question.
We have not, okay.
But they are now released today in their
Okay.
briefer, organized form.
All right, so today would be an appropriate time to comment about the commercial design guidelines?
Yes,
All right,
and
terrific.
especially if we move along through the residential. We had been in the middle or first third of the residential, and the plan, my plan was to keep going. However, if you're making a special appearance, we could also, and are never to be seen again, we could rearrange a little bit.
No, that's...
So there's that thought, but thank you for that question. That's a good organizational question. Dale?
Are we, and I, same thing, I'm sorry I wasn't here, I've just got a lot of other things, it's,
I know.
Brandon well knows. If I could, I'd just like to make a comment, I think it's on number 1. It's going to be brief, I promise.
Number 1,
It's about the forest floor and the easements, the public right of
Well,
way.
let's finish maybe finish what you're trying to get at.
Yeah, so again, before we go to specifics, you're saying you'd like to make a comment on that during this meeting, and that is completely within the purview of the meeting. I'm just trying to figure out right now if anyone has any comments on what we're about to do as an exercise, if you don't
Good.
mind.
No problem.
Okay, Doug, and get your,
Use the mic, Doug.
Would you see today being the opportunity to add subject matters that aren't covered?
yeah.
That would be a
absolutely.
high volume, high view.
Absolutely. I mean, that's, again, trying to get the clear view of this document so that we can see what might be missing, what is too much, all that kind of thing.
I want to add to that too, because for those that haven't been here before, this document that Victoria has spent a lot of time working on, these documents, plural, our tool, I'm looking to make sure I'm saying that correctly, these are meant to be a tool for the conversation about how it's organized.
That's right.
So if the new members also have comments on the draft that the city put out, that's not off the table, because the
Of course
city's
not.
still taking the draft forward that we did to the bigger community meeting. I mean, we paid for a consultant to do work. We're going to get comments on that. These are going to help solicit those comments, but don't feel like you can only comment on what you see in these two documents. If you have comments on something, like to Doug's point, if there's a bigger topic that's missing from the draft in general, we'd love to hear that on the city side from you as well. So
But we could just do that in writing.
absolutely, that'd be the best,
So we don't have to
honestly.
do it here.
That would be the best thing for us.
You never have to do
Yeah.
it right here
Yeah.
either.
Mhm.
You know, you can always write in, please, and it is easier in some ways, but I think it's good to also hear what your fellow citizens have to say. Yes, Neil?
I think Victoria makes good sense. We should continue with the process we've started so that we don't get distracted. I agree with that. We also talked about a time for public comment. Could we have that maybe at the end of the meeting,
Of
Victoria?
course, well, the
Would that
whole
make
thing
more
is
sense?
public comment, really. This is, thanks to this new configuration,
Yeah.
please feel free to
We call it super table.
Super Table. Thanks to Super Table.
How about the round table?
We've got, a much more, we have the ability to have a much more casual interplay, conversation. So please don't hold back, Neil.
I promise.
Okay.
I promise you I won't.
Okay.
There's no risk of that. I don't
Okay. All right.
I swear on the Bible.
Yes, Ian.
Would now be an appropriate time to talk about, would now be an appropriate time to talk about a global overview issue that I don't think has been addressed yet explicitly, and
Let's try it. And then I'm going
All
to
right.
go to Dale because he has something on absolute number one. So you go first,
Right.
and then Dale, and then Melanie on two.
all right, so obviously I've had my differences with the people on the other side of the table, some of them, but I think there's one thing that we can all agree on, and that's the importance of preserving our dark skies at night. Now, has that been addressed explicitly in these design guidelines?
It's now
This-
addressed, yes.
All right, great, because that's very important to our character, is keeping it dark at night.
It's on
And
page 8, 2.6.
Page 8, 2.6.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good.
Okay, Dale, with your number one, top of the list comment.
Yeah, thank you. So Carmel Cares, as you know, is doing a lot of beautification, landscaping around town. And one of the things we run into are the easements, or you call it the public right-of-way. And I'm also taking a native plant class, so I'm learning a lot about Monterey pine forest, which we have on either side of us. We've sort of created a pseudo Monterey pine forest here, which used to be a lot of sand. So one of the things that concerns me is it was a little confusing. There were 2 points in number one. One said no plants in the public right-of-way, just forest floor, which means bark, wood chips. And the other one said if you have an issue with the parking spot, that you can do plantings to demarcate that in some way. So that was a little, you could put plants in some places, but not others. I'm a little concerned about that because, first of all, wood chips just turn into carbon and go back in the atmosphere, so they're not that healthy for the world. They also break down, they end up on the street, the blowers have to blow them back on, which I'm doing constantly. And
Supposed to be taken out.
and the most beautiful parts of Carmel, when I walk around on Carmelo and 13th in that area, are where they have done some beautiful plantings with native plants. The other thing, we're doing a lot of pollinator-friendly gardens, and basically we're creating a wasteland with wood chips where there's going to be no wildlife. The Monterey Pine Forest is home to, and I won't go into all the details, but hundreds of different plants, hundreds of different insects, hundreds of different mammals and reptiles, and we're creating an environment where no animals could live.
So Dale, before
yes.
you before you don't realize that you're preaching to the choir,
Okay.
because we got through chapter 1 and 2 before you arrived, we
Yes.
have already eliminated
Oh,
that. So you're
okay.
looking at the older, sorry.
I can go.
Yeah, no, please don't go, please don't go. That was it?
This was what we were going from now, so that's good.
Well, the problem was that we got through chapter 1 and 2, so those remained unchanged, and I did not go back and re-edit them. I apologize. Sorry. So please forgive me, but
I'm
there's.
very proud of all of you, and I really love the fact that this process is happening.
But thank you for pointing out the parking and the. I'll look at, where was that? Do you remember where you
Well, you
saw?
haven't edited yet, so.
Well, yeah,
But where
but
did you
I
see it,
want to
though?
know where
Yeah.
that was, where it said you could plant if it was a parking.
1.25 says no plants, pretty much. And 1.26 says if you have slopes, you can put plants.
Right.
1.27 says if you have some separated parking spaces, you can do plantings.
But instead reinforce it by separating plants from the plantings. Okay, right, and that probably is the holdover from where there was a principle about separating the parking spot on your own property from other pavement. That is a principle that's been in our guidelines. So it may be that that doesn't belong in the right of way, but thank you for pointing that out.
And if you need somebody or some people to participate in more detailed discussions about what's good and what's not, Carmel Cares is more than happy to participate in some of our horticultural.
So let me point to your point. Let me inform you that one of our steering committee members came up with, I think, a very lovely idea of, if you look at the cover page of these documents, the appendices, one of them, suggested appendix, is a preferred building and planting materials. And that is something we need to research and figure out what that list is. I think we can build off I don't know what's currently there's stuff in the ordinance but so that people understand if they pick from those lists, things are likely to be very smooth for them because it's actually sort of I don't want to say pre-approved, but preferred by the city and the community. So that would be a place to plug in with your thoughts.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Just to briefly elaborate on that discussion, I think that's fantastic that you're looking at native species and preferring those. And so I think that if Carmel Cares could actually, for this appendix, list species, right, of specific species, that would be very helpful.
That's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah,
So that would be
right.
terrific.
Well, and maybe we can also, because we're a city support group and work very closely with Public Works, and they're a little overwhelmed at the moment, and hopefully forever, because there's unlimited number of things to do. We would like to work towards a situation where we can partner with homeowners and Public Works to guide them and maybe even help them with volunteers to execute projects so they're done properly and the plants survive, because a lot of times they don't. And landscaping companies as well, which we have partnerships with. So I think there's a lot of potential and really positive things we can do.
That's wonderful. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for coming and participating. Are you really leaving?
I have projects to go do, but I
Oh.
wanted to make sure this
Well,
happened.
thank you very much. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry that we're glad to see you. Sorry that you made it for something that we really, really had taken care of,
Yeah.
at least lip service to.
Yeah.
But the plant, it is good to, yes, and the
Well,
plantings.
Your document made it perfectly clear.
Yeah.
It's easier to find.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I like that.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you.
Okay, and you know what, I just want to make sure that folks in the Zoom room don't feel left out either of this initial decision of what we're doing and any other preliminary comments. I haven't seen any hands up, but just so I'm looking your way too. Okay, and then Melanie was queued up for something, if we're going in numerical order, in section 2.
At the very end.
Mike, here, let's share.
Thank you. 2.6.5, we're talking about the size and location of skylights. I'm just wondering if you all would think it'd be appropriate to also talk about limiting the number of skylights and avoiding skylights on the front of the roof, so that it doesn't impact on the public
Already-
right-of-way.
That already exists.
Yeah, but I just want to have it right in here so that people, you know, where we're talking about skylights, I don't think it's, you know, bad to, and this is the first mention of skylights, I think, that we emphasize that. I just throw that out to see what everybody else thinks, because I think it's a real
So
problem.
the city, I don't know where it got moved to in
Yeah.
here, but there is
Looking
a
for it.
section, so when this is constructed in the manner of, you know, a windows section or skylight section, there's a section that is specific to skylight, that has diagrams showing where they're not supposed to be at, so that is covered. I mean, as we've talked about, we don't know if this is the final form of this necessarily, because we've had some conversations about the functionality of this. If I'm, you know, someone that's doing a project and I want to know how to address windows, do I have to go to multiple places in this format versus just a Windows section? But it is in there. It's spotted throughout the document now.
I remembered it, but
Yeah.
I also thought that because skylights are a real issue, and that, you know, people have a tendency, if they're talking about skylights in two places, if you don't kind of reinforce, because they are a real problem.
So you'd be
And,
making a pitch then
you
to
know.
put it in twice
Yeah,
in the
that's
document.
what I'm saying, because no place do we deal with the number of skylights.
That is correct. There is never,
And I
I mean,
don't
we
think
do,
we
we
want to
do
I don't
use
think
the
we want
word
to.
number, but
Yeah.
we have never limited the number. So if you look at 6.3.4, which is about how to, you know, how to design your skylights, because that's a building detail, it says blend any skylights, their size, placement, number, and framing into the overall roof and building design. So it mentions that you should be conscious of the number, but what you're talking about is limiting the number. So here's one thought. I have seen buildings in this town, I can't think of where I've seen them at the moment, where the entire ridge line is a skylight. And that
Like
might
on
be,
Charles Sumner Green Studio.
yeah, maybe, for example. So I think there's a number of them where there's a kind of Big Sur-style building that has open beam, sometimes living space, and the entire ridge is glass. That, I don't know if you call that a skylight, but if you were to say only 2 skylights per house, for example, then you would preclude anybody from using glass in that way. Now, maybe we want to do that, but I just want to, or maybe you're talking about framed skylights that are different, that are sort of products that are placed. So let's take it out to the room and see what folks think about numbers of skylights. Is that something we want to limit? Any thoughts on that? Carol, get a mic if you could.
Well, I don't know how you use a number.
Yeah, it's hard. On a very large building, it would be different than on a very small building. That's a hard one to
But if you're
limit.
talking about a residence, we're not talking about the commercial area. I'm concerned about, this is the residential section, I'm concerned about what happens in the residential district, because we're talking about, you know, dark skies. Well, if a house has like 6 skylights or 4 skylights, and 2 of them are on the front roof, which.
They won't be.
Nothing can be on the front.
They can't be on the front
We
room.
have a lot of those, though. But
Not supposed
what yeah. And if this isn't enforced properly, we're gonna have more. People are really into skylights now, whether they follow these instructions we have here, which are very good, I think. I'm just concerned that, number one, that we don't have an excessive number. I've had personal experience with a design that was going through and at the planning commission stage for approval that had like 6 skylights in this house and windows that also were not taken into consideration, that came directly into my bathroom and my bedroom. And so, you know, the planning commission, when I went to them and talked to them, they you know, redesigned and eliminated some. But I think that if people understood that we don't want skylights seen from the public right of way, and we don't want to.
So that we have
Yeah.
that. So the question is there a number or even a phrase that talks about limiting the number?
Just a phrase would be helpful.
What about a phrase that says skylights should be kept to a minimum?
Yeah.
I mean, anything that's subjective, someone may think a minimum is 6, So I don't know. I mean,
That
if
would
you
allow them to say, I feel you have too
Right.
many skylights in that one thing.
Go ahead, David.
It does say already, not nor visually prominent from the street
Right.
or neighbors. So is it just about not being seen by other people, or is it about the night sky?
It's both.
Okay, so prominent, is that a sufficient controlling word?
It could be.
That sounds pretty good.
It could be nor visible from the street or prominent to the neighbors. I mean, in other words, we could say you can't see it from the street. That's something that is currently
Where did it go, Victoria?
6.3.4
Okay.
on the details area. Yeah, page 19, top of page 19. So,
This is Stephen Englund calling in from the Zoom.
oh, hi, Stephen. Thank you for your nice letter, by the way. That was really useful and made it.
Oh, sure,
And many
sure.
of the things made it into this draft.
Great. Well, I really appreciate the approach that you've been outlining. And on this one, I think whenever there's a topic like this that goes back to one of the guiding principles, I feel like this ties back to one of the golden principles of living in the forest. And I personally think that, there's, especially with small houses, one of the reasons why people put skylights in houses is to get light deep into a large structure. The houses that are allowed in the zoning are all relatively small, and architecturally, you should be able to get light into the depths of a small house fairly easily with windows. So I wonder if, what the process would be to actually, just like the town disallows visible light bulbs, why not go back to the guiding principle of, I think Carmel is one of the, leading examples of a dark sky compliant communities, and therefore skylights should be disallowed. I don't know.
Okay, there's a vote strongly in your camp, Melanie. Thank you, Stephen.
Sure.
Yes, Doug.
Rather than put a number, and I'll leave this to the architect, can we do a percentage of the roof?
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I wouldn't know what that percentage is off the top of my head, but I think that might be useful.
I think it might be, I think what we should be working from is we should be working from the perspective of the desired outcome, right? So, which means, minimizing light pollution. It means when you're a pedestrian and you're walking down the street at night, not having your night vision ruined by the glare of any light source at all. So I think that, I think that what's mainly important here is not the quantity, the size, the amount, but rather the effect. So I think saying, I think forbidding the placement of skylights so that they are visible from the public right-of-way is really what we want, right? And I think that would be better than to limit architectural expression or limit the use of skylights, but rather they need to be placed in such a fashion that they cannot be seen from the public right-of-way. Furthermore, placement of skylights so that they might, underlight the tree canopy should also be discouraged as well. So if you have trees overhanging a building and then the light is then uplighting the canopy, that also is an additional form of light pollution. Furthermore, for the overall section of 2.6, I think it's great you have preserved the nighttime dark sky character of the neighborhoods. That's lovely, but I think we explicitly need to put the expression light pollution in there, right? Because I think a lot of people are like, well, what does this mean? I've heard people who love Carmel, but they don't understand why it's so dark here at night, right? And
6.5 says light pollution.
oh, great, but I think it needs, okay, thank you for that, Carol. I think it needs to be much more prominent right there in the header at 2.6.0, a statement about light pollution. The other item I think we ought to have in here too is some sort of language about holiday lights and twinkle lights, fairy lights, whatever, what have you, because some people leave them up year round, right? And so that there should be language in there about discouraging that kind of behavior, so that it's like when it's July,
It crossed my mind. It had never come up in the
Yeah,
in
that would
the
be more of a
public.
zoning code thing, but yeah.
So I wanted to ask Brandon about
Yeah,
that
so we
topic.
actually have we actually only have it in the commercial, so in our zoning code for the commercial district, we actually have a specific time of year when holiday lights can be up. So you see like the hotels put those up. That would be something we can take a look at adding to the residential zoning code. That's much more of a zoning code thing because it's, a period of time, here's what you can and can't do versus guidelines on how to do something. So if we want to say holiday lights can only be up for a certain amount of time, then I would say let's throw that into the potential for zoning code updates.
I think it's also, this document overall, I think, is an educational opportunity for the community, right? So this is, I think ideally, this set of documents is not just about people who want to build in Carmel-by-the-Sea, but really a guidebook for everyone to try and understand our village better. So I think that there should be opportunities where possible for explanation, for preamble, say we like it dark at night, here's why, because walking down the street at night and seeing the stars is this amazing thing, blah, blah, blah. But, also having language in there that would discourage the use of holiday lights, I think that's.
So I think it's a good topic to raise,
Yeah.
and I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in on, I'm having these "don't tread on me" flag thoughts. I'm a dark sky person myself, but I see my neighbors who celebrate the lighting of their homes, and I wonder. I would love to see it darker. So, but David, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, the only thing I was thinking about is there are ways to minimize things with skylights, for example, to have shades that can close at night so that they're
That's
not
required,
illuminated.
actually.
Yeah. Is it in here, this one?
It's not in this
okay.
document, never has.
It's in
In the
the
code.
zoning code. So
Okay,
it's
great.
the law. It's not just a guideline. You're required to have that stuff.
That seems to solve the problem of the
You have to have
skylights.
shades, so skylights have to have shades installed on them.
Yeah.
Brandon, is that automatic, or do they have to actually ask the shade to come? You know what I'm saying?
I don't think it gets to that level of specificity. No, it doesn't.
Okay,
So it
because
doesn't say-
somebody could have light pollution at night just because they
Sure,
don't bother
we
putting
can,
the shade.
we can change that so that they have to be automatic, but
So my recollection of just a caveat on automatic is that breaks. And, we had a whole building designed down at the beach that was supposed to be opaque glass that turned out, oops, that technology isn't ready, or that technology fails, or we can't spring for it, or whatever. So I think actually, this is a very strange sort of Luddite thing to say, but if you're being bothered by your neighbor's skylight and they have a shade that they can pull over, then you can make a call and say, could you close your shade, please?
and they can't say the electronics
They can't
are
say it
broken.
doesn't work,
Yeah.
right. So in general, just so you know, I'll show my cards as an architect. I am a low-tech architect because the way technology works is it is not as long-lasting as the building. It changes too much, it fails, et cetera. So that's how I advise my clients. So let me just summarize what I've heard. What I
Can I
think we are
question?
trying to do. Sorry, go ahead. Someone,
Hi.
Joe? Yes.
Yes, Joe. So, I'm one of those people you would put on the list of wonder why it's so dark in Carmel. And I wondered that since 1983 when I bought my first house on Dolores Street. And I am learning, listening to this. I've lived out in the city for 3 years, although I've owned property for 40. I'm learning how prized dark sky is among the people in this conversation. But I'm honestly wondering, has the city ever surveyed the property owners about their feelings about light pollution versus lights for decoration versus skylights? Has that ever been surveyed? How confident are you that you've got the city population on your side on the restrictions on lights?
It's a good question. This is, just so you know, Joe, this has been in this is nothing new. There's this topic is not new in any way. It's been in this document for a quarter century. And, for those of us who've lived there, I haven't heard much about, yes, people do, maybe like yourself, have their individual thoughts about it, but I've never heard of a kind of uprising against the quarter century of this being in our documents, but no, my guess is
The
there's
answer to
been
the
no
question
survey.
is, I'm not aware of any survey. I saw
Yeah.
Doug shaking his head no. He would have been
Yeah.
around for a time when that might have happened.
Yeah, but I
The
think
reason
there are certain, okay, go ahead.
So wait, Ian, please, let's, Joe, your point is taken. I think we should, unless you have another point, I just want to remind everyone that we're over half an hour into this, and we haven't left last meeting's topics yet. So I was going to summarize what I think we have come to, which is a strong...
Victoria, there's a very important point I really feel
Okay.
passionate about
Please,
making.
express your passion.
Okay, I'm sorry. But there are certain aspects about Carmel-by-the-Sea that are immutable things that we should all be agreeing on about the character of our village, and Dark Skies is certainly one of those things. It's just like if you don't like the forest, Carmel-by-the-Sea is not the place for you to live. If you don't like hearing the surf at night, this is not your town. Dark Skies is among those. And when Perry Newberry, who ran for mayor back in like the beginning of the 1920s, he specifically called out streetlights. If you want streetlights, don't vote for Perry Newberry. So the dark sky tradition goes back 100 years and more. And so that is something that we should all, I would hope that we could all be guardians of. And we should not be putting up certain aspects of the character of our village up to popular consensus. Rather, we should be trying to work hard to preserve them. So yeah, I mean, we should be looking at things that are, you know, whether or not they're still valuable today, relevant today, like street addresses, but there are some immutable qualities that I think should be on discussion and worthy of trying to build enthusiasm for, to preserve and support.
Okay, I'm going to summarize the skylight thing now. I think we want to add that it's shaded skylights, even though that's in the zoning code, just so people know that that's always what we're thinking about when we say skylight. I didn't know that, Brandon, so it's good to just, we're going to add a link to the zoning code that deals with the skylights here. We are going to talk about, we might try to put in a phrase about uplighting the tree canopy, which seems to me like a good effect of whether people are doing skylights correctly or not. Instead of saying it's visually prominent either from the streets or neighbors, we're going to strengthen it shouldn't be visible from the public, and then please be nice to your neighbors. And then we're going to consider a % of the roof. Maybe I'll throw that back to just, I don't know, I don't think we can resolve that today, if that's
Yeah, I don't
something
think
we
so.
want to do.
Yeah.
But let's just table
We can
that
explore it.
as something to think about, maybe for the architects in the community, to think how that would work. Obviously, like 100% of the roof, we could probably agree is probably not good. And maybe 50% we could say is not good. So maybe it's not as hard as we think, but that I think we cannot resolve right today in our conversation. So now I'm going to implore us to move on to chapter 3,
Can I just say one thing?
if it's brief.
Guys, before all the discussion on this, I heard the illicit discussion, and we got it, and I'm very...
No, it's very good, actually a very good discussion, if lengthy. Okay. Yes, Don, please, and look.
Extend the meeting another 10 hours. We'll get there.
Don, take your mic, please. Yes, no, and that, I apologized for that. That's just because 1 and 2 were not, I've now crossed it out, and the next iteration will not have that. And if you notice anything in general that's already been discussed that has not been picked up as an edit, of course, let me know. We're trying to capture to the greatest consensus possible, the nature of our discussion in this community. That's the goal, is in my secretary hat on. Okay, so number 3, key principle 3. Again, be mindful of italics. You will see here, I'll do a little bit of tour guiding. In 3.1.2, this is all new. This is a Doug Schmidt's clause about the compounding and the estate qualities of that we've been talking about literally, I think, since April, but have never remembered, frankly, to sort of put it anywhere. And again, this is our first stab at this. This is our first input that we are giving to this draft. So here it is for your consideration, just a stab. And you might even think of this as a placeholder. We wanted to have something about compounds and estates. Here it is. What do you guys think? Should it be phrased anything like this?
Just read it.
Okay. On oversized or combined properties, maintain the open space character of Carmel's typical 4,000 square foot lot sizes, avoiding the appearance of a quote-unquote compound or quote-unquote estate. I mean, I don't know. That's what I kind of heard over the year. Doug is the master, you tell.
I'd like to, if you're
Grab the mic, Doug.
play with it. Oops.
Go for it.
Just want to play with it, not bring something back. to
Oh, you
something.
want to play, okay, in your own time, please do. Okay, so Doug is going to take another look at that. This, like I said, please always think this is just a tool. I knew this was a topic people wanted to have on here, so I just put it in as a stab. I have no allegiance to anything in here or any phrasing. Okay, so moving along, again, if you see something in plain text, in my, again, human opinion, it is basically what was there before. So, oh, Don, go ahead, sorry, use the mic.
We haven't discussed changes have been made to the guiding principles. And the original one we had, keep every built structure modest and simple. That word simple has been used repeatedly in our documents, and I don't like it removed.
You don't like it removed?
No, I do not.
Okay. You are bucking the trend, Don.
Keep it simple, you're saying keep it simple.
Yeah, he likes simple.
Keep it simple, simple.
We have,
Simple and modest has been written many times.
so which one did you just read? Because this is, are you on number 5?
No, I'm back to 3, the original guiding principles.
Yeah, right here.
I hadn't heard any discussion about changing the principles.
Oh, I see. No, I think what you're looking at is that we reordered the principles.
Yeah.
So I think you might be a little bit confused there. The one I think you're referring to is now number 5. So what Melanie and I realized at one point in one of our sessions is that we were not following the funnel of scale. We had put in house or detail type of principles before larger concepts. So I think 3 became 5 and 5 became 3 or something like that. So you're referring to number 5, Don, and number 5.
5 guiding principles doesn't say that either.
Right. Instead of the word simple, by community discussion, we went from design every built structure with modesty and simplicity to modesty and restraint. And that,
I didn't hear that discussion.
I think you were here for that, but it doesn't, we can certainly re-raise the question, but let's wait till number 5 until we're actually at that point. And let's, right now we're talking about neighborhood fit. So chapter 3 is neighborhood fit. That's why we're talking about compounds and estates during this, I'll call it a subheading, 3.0. Is there anything on page 9 that sticks out here? Yes, David.
I love the example where they show the second picture down on the right, where they show sort of combining both front yards in a way to accentuate a larger area.
Yeah.
The only problem with that is what happens on the other side, the next house. Then those two roads are right next to each other, or driveways. You know, if you continue that pattern along the street, you wind up getting, you know, sort of the opposite. You get one large place and then one tiny place.
You're talking about driveways in particular with this diagram.
Like how they're using driveways, putting them on the far sides of the properties on opposite sides of each other. That's really cool. It's just that when you continue that out, you're going to get the opposite, and then you're going to get the same. And so I don't know.
Well, it's a very good, interesting observation. First of all, this diagram is not about really entirely about driveway placement. It's about it's supposed to be, I believe, Nori's not here today, but I believe it is about the configuration of the building mass. So if you look at the way look at the top one that has the X in it and how it's kind of 2 buildings that both go from the front to the back and they shift to the right as they go back. And in the second one, they arc toward each other in the back. That, I believe, is the content of this diagram. But what I love about this discussion is it shows us how difficult it is sometimes to interpret these diagrams, because what you're getting from the diagram is the driveway placement, which is also something shown here. And I don't know how to clarify that for this diagram.
Is this one that had a caption on it before? Do you remember? Because I think you pulled some captions off as you were going through.
The caption is contained in this 3.1.3.
Okay.
So, like, again, this is just such an outline, but the relevant, so normally this would have maybe like a little, you'd either know that this is an unformatted document, so you would know that 3.1.3 describes these two, so it says, relate a building's mass to the context of other homes nearby. And 3.1.1, coordinate open space and careful response to other open spaces. So these are the descriptors of these diagrams. They're not talking about driveway placement. On the other hand, you're raising a good point that the driveway could interfere with the clumping of open space if you keep mirroring them. So maybe one solution is that this shows more than two buildings, doesn't show just a pair. That would be one way to maybe solve this diagram. Again, maybe connecting it to the, with an arrow or whatever. Again, when this document, if it ever gets formatted differently, you would be able to see exactly which principle is supposed to be illustrated by this illustration, which I think actually is 3.1.1. And you would know it wasn't about driveways. But, you know, it's a good point, David. It's a little confusing. No diagram can do all things. So, and to your point, for this one below it, which is about staggered setbacks, we also have so that goes to 3.1.4. But we also want to stagger the garage setbacks. So, you know, if I were editing this diagram, I might add arrows in front of the little garages, which are also correctly staggered. It also, 3.1.5, staggers side setbacks. It would be nice if that was shown in this diagram. Anything, you know, picture's worth a million words, so, or 1,000. Yes, go ahead, Carol. Do you have a mic?
What if we, like in many documents, when we have a section at the end, we say, see figure 1.
Right.
See
Figure
figure
1,
2.
right.
So that you know what to look at
Right.
in relation to what section.
Well, and again, please forgive, this is literally a document that just has a list on the left-hand side and vaguely relevant list of images on the right-hand side with no attempt to put them, you know, referring to each other, because this is just a working tool. It is not a formatted document.
And I think there was some more, there are more diagrams actually in the first draft that went out on February 9th. I think you just grabbed some that you thought were most relevant to the exercise here, is that right?
It's true, but I don't know if there were more on that topic.
I don't know if there was either. I think
Yeah.
that's just, but as people are going through this, they understand there may be more actually
Yes.
diagrams in the February 9th draft that Nori put out.
And we can add those.
Yeah, we can add them back
certainly
in.
add them.
Yeah, exactly.
We can certainly add them, and I
Yeah.
think it's, I will tell you that that I probably looked for something and didn't find it, and that's why it's not there, but that doesn't mean it's not there in the original draft for February 9th. So please always use that first draft to find, if you think there are helpful illustrations that need to be ported to a particular spot, then of course, that would be really helpful.
I think that.
This is
pay
page
attention-
9. Yeah, go ahead.
Pay attention to the pictures and the diagrams. These are not all the ones that are gonna be in here necessarily. So we'd like your input to tell us, you know, just like we're doing now, which ones work and which ones don't. And if you have in your mind,
The
ones
mic
that
on.
are better, both diagrams and pictures, we'll certainly listen to those because we're gonna go through them. There are a lot of them in here that I have a problem with. So I'm sure those of you who are looking at this have issues too, so.
I'd like to chime in on this. I think, you know, I think a good statement either to be placed perhaps on page 5 at 2.0, or and then maybe again reminding people here on section 3.0 is ideally Carmel-by-the-Sea should feel like an unbroken swath of forest punctuated by houses, right? So I think so I think that one guiding principle for everything we do here building-wise in the village, in the residential, is that it should feel like one continuous forest that happens to be punctuated with houses, right?
I think that's a good point. And in fact, if you look at the cover of where the principles are in their at least current form, 2.0.0, that's an edit mistake, now says the character and continuity of the forest, because throughout Nori's draft, there are mentions of the continuity of the forest. I agree with you, Ian, it could be better emphasized. That is an overall comment that I would say for
The image that
yeah,
It's a big picture. Why do we do this?
right.
Well, and one of the things I would offer is that, you know, so the February 9th draft came out, and that was like drinking from a fire hose. You know, that's the rough draft, it's the first draft. Everything that everybody talked about went in there. And so a lot of the stuff you're talking about, Ian, is actually in that draft, like the 35, 40 pages that are like the first starting part. And so we talked about, you know, maybe that some of that stuff is so important that it stays in, but some of it goes down to an appendice.
Yeah.
So like those statements are actually in the February 9th draft right up front. You know, why are we doing this? What's the village all about? So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the February 9th draft or not. But that, maybe if you have some feedback on what in that language that Nori put together, sort of setting that context would be so key to maybe leave at the front of it.
Right. Well, I think it's good to have like a preamble, kind of like a upfront explanation, overview, preface. But I think it's also then important to remind people at appropriate junctures those specific things. So, like on the dark skies thing, say here's why we like it dark, and then here again on in section 2.0 and again in section 3.0 why it's important to arrange our buildings the way that we do, have our landscaping the way we do. It's because we want a sense of a continuous forest.
So for example, in 2.1.0, nestle a building in the trees to minimize the mass visible from public view and to maintain the continuity of the forest, et cetera. So I think Ian's right that the concept of continuity is underplayed in general in this section, but we have backtracked again. I want to keep us moving a little bit. Now we're at the hour mark, so I'm getting serious now. So we're on page 10, but Nancy, I don't want to leave you out. Go ahead.
Still on page 9.
Okay, thank you.
I know that myself personally, and I know that our mayor are jointly concerned about garages that are placed at or near the property line, as it, number one, potentially eliminates the ability to park in front of the garage, another vehicle in a vertical alignment, which parking to a lot of people is really critical, and especially if over time we're going to, parking becomes a more bigger challenge. That's an issue, and then there's the potential safety issue of pulling out into the roadway without enough visibility because of the placement of the garage. So I would like to see us address that somehow. And I know, Brandon, this came up at the Planning Commission yesterday with regard to one of the House proposals, and I still think it's a big issue, and we need to put our arms around it somehow.
Can I ask Nancy a question on that to see where
Yes,
she's going?
go
Because
for it.
Nancy, I think you know this, but our code currently, between the code and the design guidelines, it actually encourages garages in the front setback right now.
Yeah.
So are you advocating for saying we don't encourage garages in the front setback anymore, or are you just saying to get your hand to make it more clear how far it should be set back to be safe, but still allow them in the front setback?
I would discourage it and potentially even change the code as a resident. But that might be a bigger issue. That might be a bigger issue and outside of the scope of what we can embrace right now. But it's likely to come up when we get everybody in a room again.
Yeah, that's good, because I've been taking notes on these, sort of bigger policy conversations that we're going to have at some point, like things about man-made materials, or do we want to still encourage garages in the front setback? So that's helpful. Thank you.
So, and I want to thank you, Nancy, for raising the issue of the driveway that doesn't fit a full car. I got a note written to me that I've never shared, but it's in my own notes on that topic, but it's never been said out loud here publicly. So this was just a random citizen who doesn't usually has never come to the meeting, that having a car length that's tempting to put a car there but doesn't quite fit your car is a problem. So the idea of a full car length or something that there's no chance you would ever try to put a car there was the suggestion I got from the public. So I have never, but can we put a pin on that and find out where something like that might fit into this? And then the idea of whether or not to have that tradition suspended altogether, I think, is a much bigger question, probably too big for us today. So can we please move on to page 10? Will you let Thank you, Ian. I can see you're being very generous. Okay, so I'm going to work that in, Nancy, somewhere, or we might come to it later today. Yes, Doug.
Could you skip through point 2 on views? Because since our last meeting, I've been doing research. Since our last meeting, I've been doing research, and I'm working on a paper for us because the courts have basically held that you have no right to a view. Common law says that as well. And then the municipalities that have adopted ordinances, such as Tiburon, immediately ended up in court as to whether or not it was constitutional. That case went on an appeal and back and forth. And so I'm getting down to the nitty-gritty about the rights of views and whether we should get involved. I'm coming to the conclusion that Neil mentioned that it's a civil matter, but I want to explore that further.
Between neighbors. So we obviously have a lot of things. We have a tradition of talking about views in this town. We have a tradition of talking about views when projects are reviewed and using the Planning Commission as a way to work out neighbor issues. The proposal we've heard is, from Neil and Doug, is that potentially we should just stop doing this, and that this is something that is generally speaking a can of worms and legally has other ways to handle in America. And I will just, because I've encouraged Doug to do this, and I am completely personally, it doesn't matter what I think anyway, but it's personally something that is of interest to me to hear that side of that. I will just, as a devil's advocate, say the possibility of using the Planning Commission to create harmony and a space for negotiation between neighbors may be the counterpoint. And maybe we don't want to be in that business, but that, I believe, is the role that it's been playing. So I would love to see this play out and have this serious discussion. But I don't mind tabling it at all. Thank you, because that moves us to the next page. There's nothing else that's italicized. Again, if anyone notices something that seems weird or whatever on 3 point, at the bottom of page 10, then we can move to page 11, which is a new
Sorry,
topic.
could I make one comment about?
Yes, go ahead, Eric. Sorry,
This
Steve.
is Stephen.
Stephen.
Just because I think it's really fascinating to hear which of these topics we pause and really delve into. That last topic about the garages, to me, really talks about the impact of cars on the forest. And I look back at the guiding principles, and it's interesting how much we emphasize buildings and how they impact the forest. And if the forest is the guiding principle, I think maybe there should be some sort of consideration, and I made this comment in my overall notes as well, is that like the impact of the car and deliveries, so to speak. I mean, just basically the impact of vehicular traffic and vehicular parking is not mentioned in the guiding principles. And I wonder, it's such a big part of our life, and I wonder how the guidelines want to get into that, because I could or could not agree with the last comment about garages, but I think if you undo the ability to have the garages in the setbacks that's currently allowed, then it's going to drive other things like the underground parking, which has a whole other set of impacts visually, which as an architect, I wonder which is better. It could be on a case-by-case basis, but it's just a big topic that maybe want to show up somewhere in the guiding principles.
It is a big topic, Stephen, and I really personally did appreciate your thoughtfulness on introducing it as a more primary topic. And I don't know if you saw that, Brandon, but I did want to ask, first of all, I thought most of your comments, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, had to do with the commercial district, at least the way you were speaking about it, because for the residential guidelines, we do have a fair amount on how to park your car, staying out of the right of way, et cetera.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, so let's make sure we get more comments on that when we get to commercial, if and when we get to commercial. But I take those points, and I'm very curious about what staff has to say, but I do want to kind of keep that more in the commercial discussion, if you agree it's relevant there. Doug, were you trying to, yeah, microphone?
I'm jumping ahead to page 11, but it's a consistency issue that goes back to number 9, page 9. 4.1.4, we said municipal code, chapter, et cetera. Page 9, it says Carmel Municipal Code. So we ought to just put municipal code, or if we're going to do Carmel, we ought to put the correct title of the book, which is Carmel-by-the-Sea.
Right, so show me, where was this, where does it say
Page
Carmel?
9.
Oh, page 9.
3.1.5 says Carmel Municipal Code.
Right.
So we either take Carmel out or put the correct title in there, whereas on page 11, it just refers to municipal code.
Right, and just says the chapter. I think in general, there'll have to be a pass that has not, Brandon and everybody else acknowledges has not happened, which is, where are all the links? What are they to? What are we going to call them? Do we just say city regulations for every single link, and then you just end up in the right spot, so you don't ever have to edit that? I don't know, but yeah, it's a good point. It's kind of a formatting point. Yeah. Okay, so now we're on the heritage question of 4.0.0. Here, we are really getting, I don't know, what are people's reactions? I think 4.2 is the part that's the most edited for things we've talked about over the year. So, for example, 4.2.0 is the old language, by the way, that was in the 25-year-old document, Continue Carmel's Tradition of Diversity in Architectural Styles. That was altered in the release from the 9th, but I personally thought it was much clearer in the earlier version, so this is the earlier version, just as a, go ahead, Nancy,
Yeah.
I can barely see you down there.
So my preference throughout the document is to minimize reference of styles and just talk about characteristics of the homes that we like and don't like. So I'll defer to others to comment further on that section header. Where I have some additional comments is in the 4.2.3. And I'm really confused with the words on that as a layperson. Maybe others that are more in the business would understand it. To me, McMansions are in the, just connotate something that's very large. That's all that means to me, and I don't understand where that is a part of the introductory part of that sentence, or maybe that's the whole point that you're trying to create a distinction in that. So it's just doesn't read intuitively as a layperson.
Okay, that's a good feedback. And just so you know, I think McMansion means not a mansion, but something that wants to look like a mansion. So that really does get, if we understand that, I mean, then maybe that term needs to be defined, maybe it needs to be eliminated, but a mansion is something that could be quite, in fact, we have a mansion at the end of the intersection of 11th and Taurus, what's now the Hess family, and it's a beautiful, in my opinion, a beautiful Spanish Revival mansion. It's 3 or 4 stories tall. It's on an enormous piece of property. It's very authentic as a 1920s revivalist mansion. That is not a McMansion. A McMansion is something that might be on a typical Carmel-sized lot, might actually meet, in fact, would have to meet all the spatial and volumetric qualities, but would like to look like the Hess mansion. So might have an estate gate or oversized windows, et cetera. So it's the Mick part is the fast food kind of fakeness of it. So, but if that is not something that's a commonly understood term, then it's not very helpful. And this is an insertion that is a result primarily, again, my trying to put placeholders for discussion items that have come up. Last meeting, Eric Dyer gave a very, I think, thoughtful input about the bohemian, artistic, individualistic quality of Carmel, and having something about that somewhere in the document so that we remind folks that that is our heritage. So that was, again, just a placeholder. Can we talk about that in some way in this document? Go ahead, David.
So,
Go ahead. You have the microphone.
all right, I'd like to second what Nancy said about an emphasis on underlying qualities opposed to styles. I think that's important because like McMansion is in effect a style, right? And as we just saw, it led to confusion about, well, what do we mean by McMansion? But rather, this document overall should be teasing out qualities that make a house or a building appropriate to the village or not. I think that so that's the most important thing. And I think as to what you just said about Eric Dyer's comment, there should be something about Carmel-by-the-Sea characteristically, because it has been a place where there has been lack of convention, right? Where whimsy is rewarded, and we see that across architectural styles, be it Comstock's early work with historic cottages or Henry Hill's work later on. There has been, a lack of convention, and whimsy is appropriate to the village. Trying things that are atypical is appropriate to the village's heritage as an artist colony, as a place where individuals have come to explore themselves and have free expression.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I agree. David?
So I was looking and exploring the McMansion term, and there was some very clear design guidelines, if you will, for
create a
McMansions.
McMansion?
Yeah, and it was very interesting and it was very concise and very clear. There were certain elements that made it a McMansion, and so that is expressive. If I was going to try to prove that a house was or wasn't a McMansion, I could find evidence to state that. So in that regard, it is appropriate, I would say, if we're going to talk about styles. The other thing is that I would like to add something in there that we don't want to have commercial style buildings in our residential environments. So that's the other thing I'd like to add.
If I could jump, sorry, Neil, I'll jump in real
Yeah,
quick.
go ahead.
Just from a sort of like staff and like because the ultimate goal of these design guidelines that I think we all agree on is that it's a functional document that actually gets used when projects really come through the chopper. Like that's really what we're all doing here.
Yes.
So I'm kind of always kind of thinking about how this gets
Thank you
used.
for doing that, thinking that way.
Sure, yeah. And one thing I think about this, 4.2.3, I think if you take a step up from a level, the entire design guidelines actually do this. This is like really, if the design guidelines are done correctly, we almost don't even need this
I hope so.
statement.
Right.
Because, it talks in different areas about how you do the project, so it will kind of protect against a McMansion. It talks about, valuing the character and being subordinate and sort of like playing nicely with all your other surrounding houses, which gets to this new that deviate from Carmel's whimsical artistic history. Because I'm thinking practically, as my staff's going through and making findings and presenting, we like to show our work to the Planning Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody wants to tune in last night at the Planning Commission, it's a great example of how it actually is working right now. There was projects, Carol, you were there. There are projects that went through the process and were scaled back. We made recommendations about, I'll go get it at a break. This roof material that was just horrible. It's like this aluminum fake shake roof, and we said no, and Planning Commission backed us up, and I'm kind of deviating there. But my point is, when we have to make these findings and suggestions for the Planning Commission, this is going to be, a difficult one. What is whimsical, what's artistic history versus it meets these criteria in the design guidelines. So I guess I'm just making the pitch for, I think the design guidelines already do for 2.2.3, it might just not be a value add.
So
honestly.
I think that's I really like the lens that you bring to this, Brandon. So we are always thinking, can the Planning Commission actually use this to help, and the staff to help guide these things along? I think what the most pointed remark that I've picked up so far on this 4.2.0 is, shall we eliminate styles altogether? That was Nancy's point. it would be interesting, and it reminds me of other things. Shall we eliminate views altogether? These are the more content-laden critiques. Why are we talking about style at all? That is an interesting question. I don't know. I'm throwing it out to the table. Neil.
I love this subject. I used to do a seminar series called Homecoming Seminar Series. It was given to the psychology department of Sonoma State University at their request. It was about the psychology of architecture. One of the things that we would do is we would talk about the personality of each different style. And we would craft a person, a human, around the craftsman style. We'd craft a person around the modern style. We'd craft a person around Japanese style. And each person had its own feelings and nature. One was a woman, one was a man. They had different temperaments. And so people could see that styles really communicate a feeling. They create an impression. So I've had many thoughts about styles in this document. One of them that we're saying you must adhere exactly to the craftsman style for it to be approved. And I thought, well, but what if somebody does a really nice design and it's part craftsman and it's part Old English and it's part Cotswold, but it really glues together. It's not a literal style, but we all look at it and say, that's very Carmel. So that was one of my thoughts is by restricting to the literal definition of what that style looks like, are we eliminating the possibility of doing something truly innovative? But the other thing is that modern style architecture does not have the feeling, the characteristic, the nature, or the humanity of the village of Carmel. And where you really begin to understand this is sitting out at the farmer's market, as Carol and I have many, many times. And they just come in and say, we see you're losing it. They walk up to the table and they sign our petition without even talking to us, because they know immediately. And then they say what happened in their village in Colorado and their village in Massachusetts and their city in Texas. We've had 100 stories of them losing the character to modern style architecture, okay? So this is not just another style. But in a way, I understand what Nancy is saying. Is this a strictly correct craftsman style? Here's the book for craftsman style. Does it obey all the principles of craftsman style? I hope we don't go too far that way. But continue to say, does it fit the village forest character of Carmel? And so this is the thing about styles. I don't know how to do this from here. But there has to be some kind of a conversation that allows people to understand that we don't want the styles that are not friendly, that are not intimate, that are impressive. And modern architecture is a great deal about sculpture and not about life. And when you design architecture for the life inside of it, you get something very different than with modern style. I'll stop there.
Okay, so let's go right to the question that I asked, which is, Nancy has proposed removing style altogether so that we don't so that we emphasize basically the modesty, the fit to Carmel, the craftsmanship, the quality of the building. I think we need to, Neil expressed his views on particular styles. I want to address Nancy's question. I want to make sure we have a discussion about that before we move on off this topic. Carol, do you have any thoughts about that? I'm going to call on you, put you on the spot.
I agree with Neil that we don't want to get caught up in, we just reviewed for the Historic Resources Board a house that didn't quite fit craftsman style. And, it had lots of the qualities, but not all the qualities. And I was thinking, can we step away from being so strict about, does this exactly fit a style? It didn't seem to fit right. And in my thinking, that we should be so concerned about that. Is this a house that looks like Carmel, feels like Carmel, is old Carmel, is historic? That was the question. So I agree in that sense that we can get too caught up in styles. On the other hand, I think that the definition of styles really helps us to determine what we're talking about. generally speaking. And yes, we can do a little mix and match and creativity and all that, but the styles do convey, you know, what Carmel is, as opposed to every other city that we see around. And that's what we're trying to keep, is that very special nature of Carmel. And we do see the modern styles moving in and taking over, which they're doing in a lot of areas, because this is the fad, this is the thing that's in, and that's, you know, something everybody likes that's younger, I suppose. Not everybody, and we're never gonna get 100% agreement. But from what we've seen, and we have I just want to remind those who haven't heard or have forgotten that we have over 800 signatures from people who are saying we want to keep Carmel traditional. We don't want to see the modern in Carmel. And those are both visitors and residents of Carmel. So our job is to really speak for these people who are obviously not here and probably won't ever be here, but they feel very strongly about it, and they just don't want to come to meetings, frankly. And so, you know, yes, 2 out of every 8 will want, let's move ahead, progress, and let's be very creative, and let's, you know, be artistic and all of that. But most of us really want to see Carmel stay as it has been.
I'm going to ask Don Goodhue now to weigh in.
With
Don, you're
Victoria.
on the spot. One moment. You're on the spot, Don, because you're the other architect in the room. I mean, I know Neil's also an architectural designer, but he's already spoken. I want to know your thoughts on whether we should be talking about style in this document, architectural style, in any way. That was Nancy's question, and I don't know, nobody's really addressed that, except Carol's saying she wants to talk about only a particular style being here. I guess that's what Neil and Carol are saying. They want to talk about the style in that way. The proposal on the table is, shall we talk about style at all?
I don't know if we want to talk about style. That's an interesting point. I do believe that Carmel's heritage is a lot of good expressions, individual expressions, and not conforming to one particular, quote, style. So I think I'm going to stay away from that, where we're pushing people toward, without even saying it, we're pushing them toward one style.
And this is something that I would, you know, even though Brandon had some good comments and then Nancy took up McMansion, if you look at 4.2.3 and 4.2.4, which are both about differentiating yourself from your neighbors. One of the things that I think caused this original guideline to come into place, I might be botching this history, others will know better, but we have had times in the past of this town where a developer has purchased several lots in a row and put up similar buildings to one another in a speculative manner. We do now have speculation, of course, always, but generally it is controlled in a different way than it used to be, probably thanks to these guidelines. But I'm thinking of the end of Taurus Street, across from the mansion I mentioned earlier, where a series of, they look like Southern California, inland Southern California speculative development homes that have become a little bit softened by the forest over time, but they stand out for their similarity to one another, and they're all in a row. That was something that shocked and freaked people out. That was before my time. These are the stories I've been told. Perhaps what we should be focusing on is making sure that doesn't happen, because I think that we have 100% consensus on.
And I think 4.2.4 does that. I mean, if I'm looking at 4.2 with my, you know, staff report hat, that one's easy. Like, we can use that all day long. That's a clear test that we can pass. The problem, like I was pointing, not problem, but like the difficulty with 4.2.3 is that it's harder to, you know, write a specific finding or measure that one. 4.2.4 is a slam dunk. I think that's clear, and that maybe solves the problem that you're talking about.
And maybe it needs to be strengthened, though. I mean, I think the differentiate is a very, you know, kind of moderate word. Maybe we need to
You could add the language in there you're talking about to not give the appearance of
Speculative development. Yeah. So I feel like my job here is to find the consensus where it is, if we have it, on anything. And so I still don't know, I don't think we have total consensus, frankly, just to be clear, that a particular style needs to be put forward. That I don't think we have. I think we have some consensus about speculative development being anathema. We have some consensus about quirky individuality and trying to, in fact, that's something that you both have said here about, we were struggling, this was a craftsman building, it wasn't high craftsman, it wasn't the paragon of the style, but we still thought it was Carmel. Yeah. There was something individualistic about it. That Neil raised that point. So maybe that's where we need to put our focus. I'm just trying to read the room. Somebody had their hand up. Oh, go ahead. Yes, Ian.
Right. So I think that this gets to Neil's point and to Carol's point and others is that what's problematic about contemporary modern machine-made boxes in the village is that they are truly anywhere USA. They don't subordinate to the forest. They don't really work with the village. But then again, but on the other hand, we do have buildings that are characterized as modern, like the Carl Cherry Center, right? Which was the meditation room. That is an unabashedly mid-century modern expression. It's got a flat roof. It has mid-century modern detailing. It's a fantastic example of mid-century modern, and yet I think anybody would be very hard-pressed to say that that building is not Carmel. So again, this speaks to not so much styles, but rather quality. So machined, boxy buildings that someone said are in a commercial style, I agree, not appropriate to the village. But it's the qualities that make it not appropriate to the village, whereas Henry Hill buildings are also mid-century modern. They're human scale, natural materials, they subordinate and they blend very well to the forest. Those are Carmel buildings. So I think that, and to Neil's point about allowing an architect to have the creative freedom to merge Tudor, craftsman, whatever, because if that particular architect has a vision for how that might work well, then an architect should have the freedom to explore that. But again, it gets down to whether or not the merging of those, Cotswold, Tudor, craftsman, whether or not that's a successful design for our village. It all gets down to not the styles, but rather the qualities. And so I think avoiding discussion of particular styles of architecture is the right way to go, but rather talking about individual qualities, about what makes a given proposed building work in the village, work in the forested context, appropriate or not.
So you just got your second vote there, Nancy. So now we have somebody on that side, two people on that side. Yes, somebody's from the, yes, Stephen, go ahead.
I would support that approach. I think the style words always fail, and these discussions are really difficult. It reminded me of a community that has a very strong, strict adherence to a design guidelines, but it has become very held up as an international success story. But it's kind of a counterpoint to Carmel. Is the way that Sea Ranch has their design principles, which are often studied in school. And I just popped into the chat an at-a-glance summary of the way that they did it. And it's funny because they actually point out Carmel as the sort of antithesis of Sea Ranch, which is, I think it's good for California to have two such strong communities. But I think it would be interesting exercise to ask ourselves, could we create a simple at-a-glance? And the way that, I think style could be handled is Carmel is about, diversity, not about uniformity. And I think, I would just vote for, avoiding the word style. I think that would be a good one, and just say that it's about, so that I just want to agree with the point.
All right, you've got two people on your team, Nancy. Listen,
Madam Chair, could I?
Yes,
so I
Brandon,
was
what team are you on?
hoping. Well, I'm not on anybody's team.
Okay.
I did want to let the conversation play out a little bit before because I understood what your question was. Yet, basically, do you think style should be in there or not? And I'll just come out and say, from a staff perspective, from a usability perspective, no. And I'll tell you why. It's kind of a blend of all of the answers we've been hearing so far. To Carol's point, the real example in a hearing where they're talking about a craftsman building, and they couldn't even come to a decision, is it a good enough craftsman building? So if you start relying on style in a document that you're using to evaluate a home at a staff level, we're going to have a difficult time with that too, if we're trying to define a style, versus does it meet the certain criteria that Ian was talking about when it's how it's built. Even these, I think we all agree there are examples of the newer modern architecture that's been built that's not done well, and maybe it's not necessarily style. What it is that it's too close to the property line, it's too massive, it's all these things that we're trying to suss out in the guidelines that we can actually evaluate on individual levels. So that would be my pitch for not focusing on style at all. Let's focus on the characteristics of the building that's being constructed. That's going to be easier and more applicable, I think, in an evaluation of a project.
So let me suggest, oh, Cindy, okay, go ahead, Cindy, you've been quiet.
Unusual. This is really an interesting discussion, and I completely agree that quality is the most important guideline for any design in Carmel, rather than telling people what they need to fit their design into. One of the things that it brought to mind is my dad did a lot of building in Carmel, and it was all mid-century modern. It was after World War II, and it was inexpensive, easy to put up. On Torres Street, west side, between 8th and 9th, he built 4 spec homes. That's what he used to call them, and I didn't really understand what he was talking about. But at any rate, they were all the same. They were slope roof, big, windows, all in a row. And I think that saving grace for them, as I listen to this kind of conversation, is that over the years, the vegetation has grown up around them. I kind of like the repetition of that roof line going down there. We always went to see Daddy's houses on Torres. One of the houses has been remodeled and it's completely out of the design. But it was just kind of an interesting reminiscence for me to realize that back in those days, my dad was doing spec houses all looking exactly the same, which is what we would not like to have done today. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Cindy. I think I know which houses you're referring to. I don't think they're all exactly the same, but they're not with the same conformity that we see now or had once seen.
Actually, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think actually all 4 of them were exactly the same.
Okay, you'll have to show me. You and I will go take a walk, because I don't,
Okay.
maybe I don't know which ones. Okay, thank you, Cindy, for that. So my suggestion for this is that we table it, sorry, Neil, and that we look at it again in the privacy of our own homes and friend circles and see what kinds of things we might think about differently for this section, and propose something at our next meeting. But that, I think, is something we are not going to resolve today, but because we've raised the level of the discussion on this to a kind of a new place, I would say, where we're talking about individuality, we're talking about lack of uniformity, we're talking about expression and creativity, which are things that people have come to us to talk about since the draft release, but really have not been the focus of this guideline over the last quarter century. So let's take a pause. We may end up back exactly where we are. We may end up someplace new. But let's take a pause on that topic and move on now to materials.
What do you think about a 5-minute stretch break?
You want a break?
Well,
okay.
I mean, we're halfway through. We got another hour and a half to go. It might be good for people.
Okay, that is the middle. You're right. That's the middle. Okay, let's take a little break on that note, and you can talk personally amongst yourselves. Thank you. Good suggestion. Wait, so your husband called. we don't want to do that. Maybe that's a way to get to this, I don't know.
building is here, the
Yeah.
manifestation
Yeah.
reference
Yeah.
is unfinished
Place
concrete.
at Surf and Sea at the end of.
You know,
Ford
Landers
and
Mansion.
San Antonio.
Yeah.
That we looked at all the
Also,
time.
you know,
Right.
yeah, cement,
That's
brick,
what I
right,
always
cinder
think
blocks,
about
basically.
too.
Also,
Yeah.
fabulously, your Carmel, right, so.
I actually think, I mean,
And then
I don't know about
unusual
if
shapes,
Nancy would
sprinkler
agree, but
wraps, that's an
I think that the term McMansion is very useful. And somehow we have to maybe describe it better or,
The rest of it is fairly.
I think people know now.
yeah,
Go back into the word set up on
yeah,
Right.
right,
Those
Right.
plan view is actually very.
Where if you look back.
Is it faddish? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, to me, I associate it with the 80s. It started, people started building,
This is a
when,
bad
when,
example of.
when organic and kind of more modest modernism got replaced by postmodernism, that was around the time that McMansion started popping up. That's, to me, it's been about 40, 50 years.
Style, quality.
I don't know, but that's just my, I'm not a historian.
Weird, you know, there's no. Might be a cat.
Ready to
This-
You guys want to
resume?
We'll get back to it? All right.
Ready to resume, everybody? Everybody at home? Yeah.
Heck yeah, this is great, actually. This process is real. I mean, Victoria and I talk about this. Like, this process has evolved. Even like super table. Like, this is good. Like, this is great.
Did you
Like,
just come up with the term super table?
no, every time we put this together, we're like, no, put it in super table format because it's
Okay.
all the tables we have.
Yeah.
It's like the biggest table we can make in here.
Right. I like it.
No attempts.
Order in the court. I am
Martin.
Ian. Order.
Ian,
Thank you. Boys. Okay, we still have all our folks, that's good. And we still have our 5 in Zoom land. Thank you for sticking with it. We are 5 minutes now past 10:30, that's good. We are making some progress. I'm liking the conversation. I think they're very important conversations. And now I'm going to direct us to page 12, 4.3, use traditional natural building materials. Yeah, I mean, I think we should look at all, I think you can see that this has some italics that may be controversial. The first in 4.3.1, there's an underlined preferred materials. That is just a placeholder for this idea of the appendix having a preferred materials link, or a link to that appendix item, if we ever figure out what that list is going to be. You will see, oh, this should have been italicized. My apologies. I took a stab as an architect.
I was going to ask you,
On the metal
this
roofs.
one, this whole 4.3.1, I don't think shows up anywhere else. I think the whole
Traditionally used as
section's new.
wood, stone. Well, no, let me clarify. That
Okay.
whole list of materials is generally throughout the draft, as opposed to in one paragraph.
So like the length, like, I was going to ask you about this one specifically because I did
Except
like
for
word
metal
search.
roofs.
So like use metal roofs only, that they're detailed simply, have no ribs or striations.
Right,
like,
sorry, I was
that's
just,
all-
no, sorry, I just was about to say
Okay.
that part about metal roofs should have all been italicized.
Got it,
That
okay,
is my,
thank you.
I'm
Thank you,
apologizing
okay.
right now. I don't know why it's not. That is my stab as an architect to try to clarify, I think, what people like and don't like about metal roofs. I personally, to put my cards on the table, am fine with metal roofs if they have a certain type of quality. I've been told, and you all can correct me who have been here longer, that the reason that the original anti-metal roof kind of vibe came into the documents was that people were afraid of like barn, like shed roofs, like those corrugated metal or rusty metal or cheap kind of shed type materials. But the tradition of a standing seam metal roof of high quality is ancient. It's an ancient historical styled tradition, most notably, I think, in almost all of Paris, which we've talked about a few times here. So I just took a stab as an architect to try to describe what it would take to have a high-quality metal roof so that we could maybe separate the fear of the cruddy roofs from the good roofs. But that's, again, totally up for grabs. So if you see from the preferred materials clause of 4.3.1, where it starts, use metal roofs only, that's up for all sorts of debate, but that's my stab. So I'll read it. Use metal roofs only if they are detailed simply, have no ribs or striations, and I'll describe that in a second. Use genuine field-installed standing or flat seams and are unreflective and either uncoated, like Corten steel, or of integrated earth-toned color. So what I'm trying to get at is there are types of roofs that are ribbed. We could also say, what did I call it? Corrugated. I could put corrugated in there. Striations and ribs are ways that usually in commercial and large roofs, like an airport, they use in the roof panel itself, between the seams, they use texture and ribbing to decrease the chances that it will be warped or have
It's a structural
or oil
thing.
canning, yeah. And what it tends to do is make it look a little less natural. It looks more industrial. It's an industrial quality of a roof. If you are handcrafting a building, then you usually are okay with a little bit of variation in a plane, right? So, for example, a wood timber is not a pristine thing. It is a thing that has character to it. So one of the qualities of a high quality, and this is also a Parisian, it's the ancient way, is that it be the metal be flat and not have this texture on it that is more associated with industrial. So that's what that's about. I personally, this is a question for staff or Nori, I know he's not here right now, but we have many photos in the thing that have standing seam roofs. We have standing seam roofs throughout the town. I imagine that there are products where maybe the one that you just showed us, where you can imagine roof manufacturers coming up with stuff where you just slap kind of a fake, not fake, but a fully preformed, factory-made, fake seamed roof. That I'm imagining, I don't even know if it exists.
Yeah, I don't know.
But what we want is a handcrafted, someone of a high-quality craftsman is up there doing the traditional way of seaming these panels. So that's what I was trying to get at with field installed. I didn't, again, see the difference between standing and flat seam. Somebody raised that question in their comments. I think it might have been Stephen and Marianne also. Different architects, actually, I think, have raised the comment, what is flat seam? How is that better? I've always saw that as just a choice. There are so many, I don't know if folks know this, there are maybe scores of ways to seam roofs that are traditional. They go like this, they go up in the middle with a cat. There's all these things. We could talk about which details we like, but I think they're pretty much, as long as they're simple and highly crafted, I think they're equivalent. And then whether we certainly want them to be unreflective, either a natural metal in its natural state or at least with an earth tone color. So this is just the set of things. I want to tell you, this is my personal stab at it as an architect. So happy to get any comments on that either now or in the future. Okay, Melanie.
What kind of material, this is a question to all of you, especially the architects, what kind of metal or what kind of material are they making these metal roofs out of? Because maybe that's the issue, because I can't think of comparing roofs in Paris with what is in Carmel right now. I mean, to me, it's just a totally different issue.
If I may, because I
Yes, please.
restored a chateau.
Grab a
in
mic.
France.
Mike.
When we restored the chateau in France, we did a part of the roof in zinc, and also we had slate roofs, but at the top part it was almost flat in zinc. So that is very traditional. I think the issue may be scale, because in our application we had very large planks of zinc with the smaller ridges, if you will. Perhaps if we were to use smaller scale roofing materials, with the smaller ridges and more closer together or something like that, it would look better on a smaller home. But just a suggestion.
Some of those exposed metals too don't function in a coastal environment. So there's that too. I mean, I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but there's some that just wouldn't work here as well because the coastal environment would just eat them away.
Sorry, I gotta go. I'll zoom in, guys.
Thank you, Neil.
So Brandon, how are we going, those of us who are not familiar and don't work with these things, architects, how are we supposed to know, and how can we translate into our document that this has to be a high quality, material and, how would I say it, manufactured,
Well, I think you're actually kind of forming it right there, Melanie. I think rather than focusing on, we want zinc roofs or we can't do copper anymore, but or we want certain types. Let's focus on what are those characteristics. Don't make it look like somebody said earlier, like we don't want commercial-looking buildings in the residential district. That's a principle that I think we can build on and tease out. Like, what is it about a commercial building in a residential district that's wrong? Like, what does that look?
Yeah.
So I think that's what we need to do with these types of things is tease out, what it is. And I think that's what Victoria's tried to do here a little bit. Is what are the qualities of the roofs that we want to see?
Can we come back with something like that so we don't spend all day on it? But I think it's really important because at least when I walk, I'm seeing more and more metal roofs. And when I look at them and then I look at shakes and shingles, I guess it's my prejudice. One is, to me, natural and fits Carmel. The other does not fit Carmel. And if we have a profuse number of these roofs, I cannot imagine what we're sacrificing in town. It really doesn't work well.
Well, and that's, sorry, Carol, if it's
ahead.
okay, I'm sorry. And that's sort of where we've been talking about, and I'm glad we're to the building material section now, because that's, we've had this conversation of formatting, this style versus having a section for things like roofs. Because if we had a roof section, I think we can maybe be more specific about what we do and don't want to see in the roof materials. But to that end, I think we just need to be really clear about what the characteristics are. And metal roofs have become such a thing. Maybe they become their own section, 4.3.2, and maybe it's its own thing altogether. Whether it's in this format or in a, by building like type, if you're doing windows and roofs as their own sections. But yeah.
So Carol,
as I
and
walk
then
around
David.
town, I'm with Melanie mostly. I think as I walk around town, I feel the same way about the metal sheet roofs, no matter what their seams are. But I think there are metal roofs that can look pretty good, such as this one. Metal roofs that look like shakes or shingles.
Can I see that, David?
Yeah, they also make them to look like tile roofs and things like that. I mean, not that you really want to use metal instead of tile. But.
Yeah, but we have to be careful because of what Brandon showed us at break.
It's right over
some
there,
of
yeah.
the things just
It has to be
don't-
done well.
Don't make it. But I think there will be materials coming out probably that will make it, that are metal, because of the whole fire danger thing that people are so scared about. We're looking at metal roofs now, and I agree that, clearly I think that shakes and shingles of wood are the most attractive, and then we're trying to accommodate, our problems with fire and so forth.
This
So.
reminds me what David's showing us reminds me of a slate roof. I mean, I look at that and I can kind of, my roof is real slate roof. And when I look at that, I think, oh my gosh, that kind of mirrors the slate. Did you have your hand up, Ian?
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead. Sorry.
it's a little, it's complicated to tease out. Again, we get down to a quality issue, right? The qualities underlying it. And there are, I think we might we might say that metal roofs, I think we should have more of a broad statement about metal roofs and roofing materials in general. We've revisited the composition shingle roofing material again and again about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. But I would venture, well, I will venture this, that roofing materials should be of high quality, should be architecturally appropriate to the house. And I'd be careful about bogging too far down into the weeds about individual qualities of individual roofing materials, because as Don will harken back when we were on the roofing subcommittee together on the Planning Commission, there's a gigantic amount of different materials out there, of products out there, and there
New ones coming all the time.
new ones coming out
Yeah.
all the time. So I think that we don't want to back the village into a corner about what they can and cannot accept, but we should say that, like all the building materials we want to see in town, they should be of high quality, they should be natural in appearance, and they should be appropriate to the structure that they're designed for, right? So it's so they should be architecturally appropriate to the proposed building. So keeping it more simple and allowing room for maneuvering.
Do you mind if we skip just momentarily, or just look at 4.3 at the same time as looking at 4.4? So I will tell you, I'm gonna tell you my own bias here. When I saw the description, and I may be the only person in the room, or maybe it's because I'm an architect that I think this, I saw the description from the draft on the 9th of February as being quite radical about the way it described what we wanted out of a man-made material. This is the draft that was given to us on February 9th, basically said, if you use a man-made material, it better look like it's not man-made. It better look like something other than what it is. It better try to fake being slate, or fake being stone, or fake being wood. And as long as it does a very good job of being fake, then we really like it. I, as an architect, fundamentally disagree with that way of thinking about materials. So and to me, that was new. That was a new proposal that I think is possibly a reaction, and I don't want to be too hard on the industry, but we have a petroleum-based material supplier industry for architects and for home builders that is constantly pushing their petroleum products or their products. It's a commercial enterprise, let's put it that way. I don't want Carmel to fall victim to the commercial pressures of, the Home Depot type. And by the way, I love Home Depot. I spend most of my time in Home Depot. But I reserve my ability to judge whether a product is worth using or not, certainly. And yet, homeowners, builders, contractors, architects also are constantly under pressure by the industry to accept new products that help those industries. They don't help our buildings, they just help those industries. It's like the tobacco companies, I'm sorry. So when you look at 4.4.2, this is my proposal that is completely trying to keep us on the old track. And it says, do not use man-made materials that fake natural or other materials in their textures or finishes. I believe this is how a good architect thinks about materials. I wish Marianne was here. I know she'll weigh in on this at some point. I will tell you that I would never condone in my own work the use of false materials to represent something else. So, for example, Melanie brought up her true slate roof. If you want a roof that's slate looking, you are not going to ever fool me by using a manufactured product that has a pattern on it that repeats over the course of that roof. That natural products do not do that. Every single piece of slate on Melanie's roof is unique, and the human eye can pick that up. That's the same with wood grain. That's the same with any kind of grain or texture on a natural material, stone, slate, etc. When you manufacture a material that has repetitive qualities to it. That's the definition of it. It's uniform. So, and I don't care about, that's fine with me as an architect. I don't mind man-made materials, but if they have a stamp on them or coloration on them or texture on them that is made to pretend to be a natural material, then as soon as you repeat that on the roof or on the wall of a building, it will stand out as being unnatural. So there is no way around that. And I think, again, that takes we are under constant pressure as architects to reverse our view on that. And that is a commercial pressure. So I just want to, that's my lecture on that. It's the one thing in this entire process that I feel like I can add as an architect to our understanding in the town that is different than any other thing in this whole project that we're undertaking. That does not, of course, at all preclude using man-made materials. There's a huge tradition in Carmel of using man-made materials, but in their honest, authentic manifestation. So that's my spiel. I know it's different from what was proposed in this draft, but it is not different from the tradition of this town. So any reactions to that?
And the tradition of this town descends, greatly from the arts and crafts movement. Around the time this village was incorporated, the village broadly was obsessed with the arts and crafts movement. So, which of course values authenticity in materials. So that's a no-brainer as far as Carmel-by-the-Sea goes, I would say. Another thing, I would like to use a term that's other than man-made because, it's, I like, instead of like man-made, is there because of the gender association, can we say manufactured? Is manufactured better or artificial or whatever? I just want to throw it out there just to get away from the word man in this day and age.
Yeah, we have batted that around a little bit. I agree with you that it's weirdly sexist, but we hadn't ever come up with a better one. Human-made.
Yeah, that's great.
Let me just do a little context. So if you remember, throughout and you probably know this already, but the reason that landed that way in the first draft was the information we gathered through the community workshops and the surveys and all that. It seemed to be that the community as a whole, certainly most of them are not architects, but they felt that was an appropriate use of human-made materials because there are, counterpoint. It would be a fun game. I'd love to actually go out and walk around and see if you could pick out, because I know of some faux slate tile roofs in town that are pretty darn good. Mm-hmm. I wonder if you'd actually be able to pick them out, because if what I've seen with human-made materials, I'm going to start using that now. I like that actually. And human-made materials is that it's when they're broken down to their most simplest form. So like take hardy boards, for example. Like it's a board, just like a singular board, versus what you see oftentimes with the cheaper human-made materials is that it's like they'll reproduce 4 or 5 courses of something so that pattern goes on. So it seems like the human-made materials are the better ones, are the ones where it's individual. So like the slate tile roofs, they're individual tiles that you then lay in a pattern, and they have 50 different colors.
Yeah, they're not uniform.
They're not uniform. That's right.
Yeah,
So.
That's part of the problem.
So if we go, if for some reason, because this is, Victoria, as you said yourself, this was your attempt to
Yes.
put your opinion in here that you feel very
Yes.
strongly about.
Yes.
If we do end up going down the road of welcoming human-made materials that replicate natural materials, I think we may want to think about how do we make sure that they do the job they're supposed to do. And I would offer that maybe it's that, they have to be the most individual piece that you would find in its natural state of whatever it's trying to replicate. So for slate, for example, we wouldn't want a chunk like this that replicates 8 slate tiles already put together. You would want individual slate tiles so that they can be made to look like they're different. So just food for thought.
Yeah, and if that manufacturer has 1,000 different individual slate patterns, then you're going to get kind of closer to replication. But that never happens. I'm just telling you. It just never happens. There are 5 or 3 or maybe I've never even seen 10. So
Let's go walk next week.
Okay.
I actually do want to show you.
But now here's the other issue, which is more of an ethical issue. I don't know if folks know that I was a professor of ethics. That the question is why. There's another question of why. If you are spending so much money to buy a fake slate where they've got 100 different patterns on the slate, why aren't you just buying slate? Or let's put it the flip way. If you want a concrete tile, by the way, Flanders Mansion is a fabulous example of a concrete building that looks gorgeous as a expression of a concrete building. That building is not modeled or textured or stamped in such a way to individuate or falsely individuate the roof tiles, for example, or the blocks that construct the walls. That is simply a concrete building that happens to be scaled, to your point, David, in such a way that it feels very humane, is in the right scale for roofing material, resembles barrel tile in the old style of that, but we don't mistake it for a clay barrel tile roof. That is the authenticity that a good architect would insist on. That is the authenticity. What we are doing, in my opinion, by insisting that people use fake materials, is we are actually putting people like me, who have integrity as designers, in a position to move toward buildings that are, in our minds, unethical as a use of materials. It is ethical to build a Flanders Mansion out of concrete, a man-made material, but it would be unethical for me to have, whoever built the Flanders Mansion, to have stamped those roof tiles to falsely make them appear to be clay tiles, for example. So that's what this is a Architecture 101 materials usage lecture, and I apologize. The other thing at stake here is also, I'm taking a stab at, is the environment. Every time you do a building material that has a layer on it that seeks to create a texture or something, you run the risk of making an ecologically unfriendly material. That doesn't happen with everything. A metal roof that may have different unapplied changes in texture, whatever, that would not change the biodegradability of the roof. That roof there is not biodegradable because of the coating that's on it. It would have been had they not coated it with the brown to make it look more woody. So, again, if we care about the ecology of the forest, which is, I think, what this building was, this town was originally built upon, which is you come to a forest, you cut down some trees, and you build your home out of that tree, and then you plant some more trees to make up for the fact that you took down some trees. That's living with the land. There is no excuse, in my opinion, in the 21st century, now that we know how to make building materials that biodegrade, that are upcyclable, reusable, that follow what is in 4.4.2 cradle to cradle, for example, standards of reusability.
Do you mean recyclable? I don't think aluminum is biodegradable.
Well, it's an element of the earth in the sense of being, it's in its natural state.
Okay.
You're right. That particular metal is just,
I don't think metal is biodegradable. I think recyclable.
Right. It's just, yeah, I mean, maybe it doesn't even apply to metal because metal is an elemental metal like aluminum, just exists in nature. It is a natural thing that goes back to being a, ore in the earth. Anyway, so in my opinion, my love of Carmel has to do with its harmony with nature. The idea that we would introduce materials to falsify natural materials that then run the risk of not being recyclable or getting us in a leadership position in America for, harmony with nature, I don't understand why we would go down that road. That is what's being proposed now. So that's my spiel. Ian has something to say, and then Doug.
Quick aside, did we talk about plastic lawns and landscaping?
That's in here. We aren't there
Good.
yet. But
We discoured them, I hope.
It's in there.
We did talk about it already, actually.
Oh, sorry, it's in the
we covered that already.
prior thing, yeah.
So, Madam Chair, I don't
Yes.
think you need to apologize. The committee has since May been making comments about artificial materials versus natural materials, and you have brought it to a point where there needs to be a decision.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I think in a community where houses are selling for $22 million, or a recent one up on Torres for $2.4 million, that this community can afford natural materials.
Thank you, Doug. Okay,
So
Nancy.
I don't think I saw decking in here.
The wedding?
Decking, because that would be something that, I mean, there's a whole lot of manufactured materials these days that contain a lot of petroleum products. And they have a longer shelf life, et cetera, but they don't fit into your profile.
Right. I'm glad you raised decking. That's been a source of a lot of lawsuits, that fake decking that doesn't biodegrade and that actually doesn't. Trex, for example, yeah. David, go ahead.
I just wanted to bring up the issue of concrete. The production of concrete is terrible for the environment. So, I mean, it's necessary for our foundations and things like that, but I think that if we're going to go down this road, we should say that we use it as a minimum.
And by the way, folks are working on concrete. Now, this is a subject of interest to me as an architect, is human-made progress in materials. For example, I think you'll see on the steering committee website, I just happened upon this the other day, a new product called hempcrete. Hempcrete is a advance on concrete. It uses natural hemp to be stronger, et cetera. So just take a look at that. I don't want anyone to think personally that I am against progress or against innovation.
Oh, it doesn't come across that way.
It's quite the contrary. But again, in my opinion, there's no excuse for picking the progressive materials that are adding to our natural environment, not harming our natural environment. So, so hempcrete is an example. We also have progress in embedding carbon in concrete. I don't know if folks are aware of that. We have carbon neutral or carbon positive or negative, carbon negative concrete now. These are things that, again, without getting too demanding in this 2023 pass, taking steps toward environmental friendliness, I think, is where we're at as a human species. And it's certainly, I would hope, that Carmel would lead the way in that.
And maybe a general statement to that effect.
So and I think this what you just said brings up something with the hempcrete and the carbon negative concrete. We are at a point where we're going to see more and more brand new building materials enter the marketplace. Some will be wonderful for our village, some will be absolutely wrong for the village. So I think that our village would be best served by having guiding principles of what we all agree are the appropriate kinds of building materials. What is the nature, again, this gets back to qualities, right? Underlying qualities. What are the underlying qualities that make a building material appropriate to our village, right? So I think that's because we need to have something that's a little more, future-proof, something that's going to be able to accommodate or help decision makers approve or deny the newfangled product coming down the pike in 15, 20 years or whatever it is. So we should really try and get the underlying qualities about what makes a good building material.
Let me draw your attention, Ian, to 4.4.1. This is a stab at that. Use man-made materials or human-made materials if their ecological impacts are equivalent to those of natural materials, meaning able to form a natural patina over time, able to be maintained rather than disposed, able to be fully dismantled and recycled or reused, biodegradable, and we'll talk about metals, maybe make sure we're clear on that, and environmentally non-toxic or beneficial. That is a stab. So to me, in terms of future-proofing a product, yes, every week a new product is coming along. Does it raise the bar for our respect for the environment, or is it neutral or lower? And so that was an attempt at that. Again, just a stab, totally open for discussion, but exactly along those lines. Go ahead. And then the cradle-to-cradle product, is also a universal standard all over the world. We don't have to pick that one, but it's nice to refer so people who want to educate themselves about what we're talking about can go to the vast research on this somewhere else besides Carmel.
I think it's a very good stab, and I think there should be again a why, right? So why are we having this? Because an acknowledgement that there's more and more and more building materials entering the market all the time to help people decide what's appropriate, not appropriate. Here are a few guiding principles about helping us discern in the future what is and is not right for our village.
I think we're going to have to put you on appendix writing.
A comment on the
Yes.
last conversation.
Stephen, please, go ahead.
I think giving it more, obviously another huge topic that generated a lot of interest and very good points. I think it would drive a slight edit to planning principle number or guiding principle number 6, where we could add materials, because we talk about authentic, back to the wording, but it doesn't mention materials. And since it's such a hot topic, design every property with authentic and consistent details and materials.
Yes, and you will see that this reappears in 6.1.8, that you have to detail your human-made materials in ways authentic, because that is our detail section. So we'll get to that hopefully soon. Again, I'm happy to put a pin in the 4.0. I've said my piece. We can come back to it on another meeting. It's kind of like the views. It's kind of like the other topic where we're going to, the style topic, where I think we should go do a little bit of ruminating on our own and see what we think and come back. This is like a pass through where we introduce the concepts that we want to discuss and debate. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's get okay to move on to section 5. Yeah, Brandon's excited to move on. Okay, designing every built structure with modesty and restraint. I think that this is one of those fairly unchanged sections. Yes. The simple. Oh, right. Thank you for reminding us, Don. This is where you were back earlier in the meeting. Design every built structure with modesty and restraint. I think you were present, but we did have a group discussion where the folks in the audience at the time, we were up on the dais, said simplicity may be getting us in trouble. Even though I personally am okay with the word simple, personally, I took the point, and we all took the point at that juncture, that there was a belief that, because folks had witnessed this, I think, at the Planning Commission meetings, I had not, but where the Planning Commission had said, this building is pushing along toward a simple profile or something, and because our design guidelines also say simplicity, then we can push that forward, and the result was some commercial-looking, industrial-looking projects. So the fear was from the audience that simple was being used as a proxy for unscaled, overly blocky.
Undecorated,
Yeah.
unornate.
So we thought, is it necessary to use the word simple, or can we get to what we want to get to if that word is being abused? So that's where I'm just refreshing our memory about how we got simple out of what is now number 5. But it looks like David has a comment, and then I want to hear from you, Don.
If you don't mind, Don, I'd just like to kind of go back over the definitions of the words and how they're kind of being used in different ways. When we look at the word simple, it says plain, basic, or uncomplicated in form, nature, or design, without much decoration or ornamentation. And in that definition, there was a nice, simple, traditional home that had a Juliet balcony with some French doors and a flower box by the window, all upstairs. And the planning department felt that was not simple enough. If those things were taken away, the facade of the house would be very dull. It wouldn't be charming, and it wouldn't have much personality. And so I'm concerned about the word being interpreted in that way. When we changed it or suggested maybe using the word restraint, that was definitely a better direction. But I do just want to bring this up. When we look at restraint, Look, it's more of a refraining of movement and stuff like that, unemotional, dispassionate, things like that. Understatement, especially in artistic expression. Okay, understatement is okay. But if we change it to restrained is a little bit better because it says understated or subtle, not excessively showy or ornate. So the difference between restraint and restrained is rather significant when we're talking about design. So I just kind of wanted to bring those up this meeting.
I
Thank
think
you.
that's a good idea. Maybe we could put a definition, we could just put a comma, or how we structure the sentence, Victoria,
Yes.
so that we get a definition of what restraint
We use the word
means.
restrained more often, for sure. I mean, I think that's a subtlety there, but, because sometimes you just need a noun instead of an adjective.
Yeah, I get it.
But-
I'm concerned
Yeah.
about how, if I was gonna argue a case for a situation,
Yeah.
and I looked at the definition of the word,
Yeah.
I could use it in a way that may not be appropriate for Carmel.
Yeah, I think it's good that you're doing such a deep dive on these implications of things. Good. Okay, Don, I'm going to bring it back to
I
you.
think that the term simple has served us well before, and I think to the layman, it's simpler to understand. No, I think we're playing with words here.
Yeah, we are.
And the layman, to the layman, I think, keep it simple.
Yeah.
The guidelines have said that before, and I think it's worked very well.
So what I will tell you my personal journey about the word simple, because I was where you are, and I could still be back there, frankly, except that I don't pay that much attention to the current planning commission projects unless someone gives me a frantic phone call, get down here. But what I'm taking from the field, the folks who do show up, is that something has shifted in the use of that word, and that what has happened is more recent than your and my time on the planning commission, and that the word simple is being used to push designs in a way that may be commercial or industrialized. Now that would be a shame, because I think it is a beautiful word, actually. It is an elegant word, but it is not maybe currently being used in the right way. And so I take that point as being something that did serve us well, but maybe isn't currently. And so what do? Do we insist that we define, do we keep simple in there, but define it like don't think you can get away with a commercial, chunky, industrial design just because we say simple? That would be an approach. Or we can say, we're tired of using the word simple, let's try something else for now. So that, I think we could do it different ways.
Well, let me jump in just to kind of bridge
Please.
for the planning commission. So I'm trying to remember the project that you're talking about. Do you remember the name of it?
Yeah, it was actually last night. Claudia Ortiz brought it up again with changes with that roof.
Okay.
And, it's, I don't know, it's kind of, cottagey Spanish kind of style,
Mhm.
something like that,
Okay.
Yeah, so it just, it is a sort of nuance about not having the window box or the balcony,
Mhm.
but from a style perspective, from I think, people like me that go around walking around the neighborhood enjoying looking at houses and stuff like that, that makes that house more enjoyable to look at. And it wasn't cluttering it up or looking like it was the wrong style.
Mhm.
It wasn't like weird or.
Okay, I kind of remember this now. So I think, and I'm trying to remember if there's more examples of this, and I think that's the only one in recent time where this conversation got to that level. And it did come down to, the planning commission's interpretation of the house looking too busy with more stuff hanging off of it. So, I think you might find yourself, regardless of what, this is how the process works, right? It's a discretionary process. You
Yes.
get your decision makers, they have your guidelines, they interpret it, and they make their decision if it meets those
Yes.
guidelines. So I think, simple has been used a long time. With the specific project that David's talking about, now I do remember it, it was that it's a smaller place. It is much, it's like one of our smaller sort of like cottages in town. And they did feel that it was just too busy, essentially, was what it came down to. So right or wrong, that was their interpretation of that word. So I don't know if, changing the word simple really changes that outcome in the future because they're going to interpret whatever word we give them a certain way.
Yes, but if we go back to the definitions, if we're arguing it, like I would be arguing it, I'd go back to the definition and I'd say, how does it apply? You know, and the word simple would not work for me trying to make a home according to this, you know, the whimsical styles of Carmel, you know. And this I'm trying to pull up this example just so you can see. It's not really even whimsical. It's very modest, actually. So I will pull it up for you to take a look at.
So I think, here's another thought. This does, in my mind, tie into the discussion that we tabled about style and about how we could possibly come up with a way to avoid the stuff we don't like. That we haven't done enough work in describing that horror show on Taurus and making sure that the stuff that we all agree we don't like does not show up again. It's possible that that could also help with the, you know, Planning Commission trying to decide, you know, if simplicity comes back, and I'm not saying it will, but, you know, Dawn, I think, has impeccable judgment. I think if simplicity came back, and I'm happy to stay with restraint, just this is my personal view. If we, as a community, said, oh no, really it wants to be simplicity, perhaps the work on making sure we know what we don't like, and that is clear in that other section, that 4.0 section, maybe that helps people not misinterpret words like restraint and simplicity. So let's just, again, put that in that category of we have a little work to do on defining what we don't want to see here. And then I will keep the word simplicity hovering here, and we will make a final decision, you know, for like what the community, at least the working community on this, wants to do with that or recommend. Go ahead, David.
I just wanted to ask Brandon if he knows, you know, whoever was reviewing it, what it was that they felt was not simple enough. There are a lot of vertical lines going on. I don't know if that has something to do with the balcony.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't want to, I mean, the Planning Commission made a decision, so I don't want us to beat up on their decision too much. But, you know, I'm just looking at the plans right now, and, you know, it's things like there's a lot of different roof pitches as you're looking at this. You've got, you know, two sort of like dormery features. You've got roof planes going in at least 3 different directions. There's a roof plane over the top of the door. And then I think what they were saying is, you know, that, you know, adding a balcony, a Juliet balcony and a flower box, just adding more stuff to the front of the house. I mean, it is a busier front elevation, and even some of the side elevations too. So like the west elevation, the east elevation, if you look at those, that's just where they're coming from. There's a lot of fenestration. There's, you know, there is a skylight on the backside. There's just a lot going on a smaller house, and I think this is where they landed, is that to simplify the design a little bit, let's take off the Juliet balcony and the flower box, because there's still a lot going on that makes this a unique, whimsical looking place.
And they could have said to restrain the building a little bit more. So it's a tough one, and again, I think we really do need to do some more work on what it is we're trying to avoid back in section 4.
Busyness.
Yeah. So
Maybe we could just add, design every built structure with modesty and simplicity appropriate to the style.
Well,
But
there's
we wanna
style
stay away
again.
from style,
There's
though.
style again. So well, let's.
Design, how's that, design?
Well, it's interesting that once we get into 5.1, 5.2, 5.6, we use the word simple.
Right. It's all over. Right. And we may or may not. So let's go to. Here's a good segue. 5.1.2. Keep primary building volumes simple. Now there, I don't know if we would have much disagreement around town. Primary building volumes. Now, if you look over at the diagram that's right next to it with the check on it, simple primary volume remains apparent. So the primary, and then this has always gone on to describe subordinate volumes using basic rectangular LT or U-shaped plans. By the way, I think I added T, and I added the word plans. And the reason is that the buildings are not U-shaped like this in elevation. They're not L-shaped like that in elevation. I just wanted to make clear, I think that it was always meant to say plans. So in plan, not in elevation. It's not U-shaped like this. There are U-shaped buildings in Paris and all sorts of things that are funky. I don't think that's.
In plan view, you're right.
In
that's-
plan view,
yeah.
yeah. That was 5.1.2. So that's a place where simple comes up, and I actually think it belongs there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good.
So let's see if there's any other simples.
Yeah, 5.16.
With a few simple planes. I think that's okay, personally.
Well, it's good.
But it's not going for simplicity in the type of fear you have overall, just for certain components, like the plan, like the roof forms. I want to point out in this some italics, again, they're not meaningful, that meaningful, but we've all been struggling with trying to understand why it's these little dormers, not little dormers, but little weird windows and stuff that look fake. So I did add a clarifying line: do not use small purposeless offsets, do not change the building material or cladding at an offset. We have an issue with offsets
Yes.
that are fake and weird and busy, so. All right. There's not much that different here. 5.1.7, this was talking about contrasting colors, and I wasn't sure that's what Nori meant or what you might have meant, Brandon. It says subdue the character of the garage by using a rectilinear form with materials and colors that do not contrast, and the rest of it I didn't understand. Do not contrast within themselves on the garage or with the main buildings?
Yeah, we've been hearing from the Planning Commission through the last couple of years. This is really the black and white housing that we've been talking about, where in the body of the structure itself, you have a white house with black trim, or a white house with a black roof. So highly contrasting colors within the body of the work. So in theory, if your garage should either match your house or be
Something
like,
different.
or like it should jive with your house, basically.
Yeah.
You just wouldn't want to have the highly contrasting colors on the garage itself either. So that's what that was intended to be, was
Okay.
that
So-
when you're painting your garage, don't paint it in contrasting colors.
Okay, so let's then, if that's correct, and I didn't understand that because I didn't know if it meant contrast with the other parts of the property or contrast within itself. So I'm gonna flag that and
Yeah.
ask that we discuss contrasting colors when we get to the color portion, which is in the detail section. So let's just put a pin in that.
Can we
Go ahead,
back to
Carol.
5.1.6?
Yes, go ahead. Go for it.
Okay, so it says compose roof forms with just a few simple planes with limited subordinate attachments such as dormers. For example, traditional gable and hip roofs have basic forms, while mansard roofs, sloping roof skirts that conceal a flat area, and clipped gables. Let's start with clipped gables. Clipped gables actually reduce the size look of a house.
A little lower.
Yeah.
To the-
It
yeah.
kind of makes it more diminished looking, which I think is a good thing on a second floor. Also, so I would not include that. And then mansard roofs, I fully agree, we don't want. Sloping roofs, skirts that conceal a flat area. David made a point for that, where it's necessary to have a flat area roof, but it looks like it's a steep roof. Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, just as an example, the chateau that we did, as I was saying before, had very steep pitched roofs. And part of the way it was able to do that is because at the top it had a relatively flat roof. At the top it was a little bit, but that created the effect. And it was really quite beautiful that way. And I think that there are situations where we can hide and make an illusion of, like, if you just had a roof, like you're looking at it from the street like this, and it happens to have a little bit of a flatter roof here, but it has a steep pitch here, you can get an illusion of a steeper pitch here without showing the fact that it's flat there.
Why couldn't you just go to the peak on that roof?
I'm just saying, if for whatever reason, maybe you have a bedroom up there or something like that, and you want to have more space. Or if you don't want it to be like this, but you want it to be steeper, or, that's the other thing about the steeper roofs. We have only 412 and something like that.
4.6.
Which may need to be, again, that's for discussion. So clipped gables, now that point was made before. I left it in because it was original text and I wanted folks to discuss it, but so it's not italic. It's all original, there's nothing new here. what do folks think about clipped gables? I frankly don't know why it's in there. I think that is a very different animal than the other two. So, because that does have to do with certain Cotswoldy kind of English
see it around
styles.
town.
We see it a lot.
It's
I
in
see it.
town, yeah.
It doesn't seem to me that it hurts the scale of the building. Dutch roofs,
Yeah.
okay. Do we agree that's a different thing? Yeah, yeah. I didn't know why that was in there. So
Yeah.
do we want to
That's
eliminate
from,
that?
like 25 years
It's
ago.
25
Yeah.
years, that's all.
Yeah, nobody can speculate why that's there.
Do we have a consensus that it's okay to take that one out?
Yeah.
For at least for the room? Okay, so I agree with that too. I don't understand why that was ever in there. On sloping roofs that are super steep, I think we can look at that when we look at the allowable slopes. I know there's been a lot of work from this, the staff, that they're still probably ongoing, about volumetrics and how we can bring back the flexibility in the roof slopes so that people can have different individual style buildings. Personally, I think we live in a community that has modest enough size buildings that we will always be able to see if you did that from the corner or whatever. It's something you might be able to pull off in the commercial district to a certain extent, because that's a building wall that you will never be able to see behind. On a private lot with our requirements for open space and stuff, I don't think we're going to get away with it. So I would put that in a different category and simply ask the staff and the community to look at the roof slopes and see what we can do to get what you want without the fake thing we can see behind.
Yeah, I agree with you. Smaller rooms or floor plans would give us the steeper roofs.
Yes,
Yeah.
that too. And also, you're not limiting the height. If you allow a steep roof to go higher, and maybe it comes into I don't know, I don't want to open a can of worms, but the idea of an element of the building that goes like a chimney that goes past.
Like a protrusion.
Yeah, a protrusion into the building envelope, whatever. You're not reducing the ceiling height. You're just trying to deal with different styles and approaches. So.
Yeah, and by changing the roof slope at the bottom, like which actually with the chateau had, and going up like that, you could actually get a steeper appearance on that part if it was desirable.
So this needs some work, and we'll look at it with the slopes shortly, I think, as we go along. We're at 11:30, so I think we could make it to that point. And we're going to come back to colors also. So moving along, we're on now page 15, ensuring the building appears no more than two. This is all original. I have a hard time disagreeing with any of this personally. The plate height someone wrote into us about 8 feet seeming low, that's actually very typical. I don't think people realize that. It is pervasive. And yet, when you go into a vaulted, in fact, Melanie and I were sitting in my living room, we all thought, oh, this is a much taller ceiling than 8 feet. And then I went over and measured it with my measuring tape, and it was about 8 feet. So almost all the time, what we think of as a low height, because we have so many pitched roofs, we end up with quite tall ceilings. So, but if people have comments on anything on this page, please. Oh, and here's the roof pitch at the bottom, right at the very bottom. So we can take that up here. Yes.
Can you show me, David, on your pad? Can you kind of go over what these look like?
Four 12s, yes.
Yeah, 4 and 16. 4 and 6.
David's like our librarian. Yes, Doug, with his mic. Yeah.
Carol Walker Davis has some comments on
Okay, she's not here. Okay. On pitch? Okay, maybe she could write in, or? All right, let's start. So while he's looking that up, what is, Brandon, what is a pitch? Talk to me about pitches.
Like what is it?
If we got, what if we got steeper? What can you imagine? What has been your experience in town, people wanting, 6 and 12 is 45
David,
degrees.
if you don't have
You're gonna show us?
something, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So this is a really good
Oh,
illustration.
excellent, yeah.
Maybe we ended up with the same thing. That'd be funny.
I'm gonna rotate it around real quick, just so everybody.
Mine's just green.
Nice.
So we'll have that one point this way, and we'll point this one this way. So what we're looking at for those in the Zoom room is a internet diagram of different roof pitches. This is like geometry class from middle school.
And at a basic level, what a roof pitch is it's the amount of rise or how steeply the pitch goes up over the span of 12 inches horizontally. So a 412 roof is, as it goes across 12 inches horizontally, it's going to rise 4 inches if you imagine like a triangle between that space. So that's where you hear these pitches. So like a 10-12 roof would be very steep.
So in a 12-12 roof, just to give you a sort of stick in the sand, is a 45-degree roof. 24-12 would be 90 degrees.
That's right.
So that wouldn't be a roof at all. So 12-12.
That's right. That's why it doesn't exist
That would
as
be
a
a
roof
wall.
pitch. That's
That would be
right.
called a wall.
You will not find a 24-12 roof pitch.
So 12-12 is exactly the middle between a shallow roof and a very steep roof, although I think 12-12 probably appears pretty steep to our human eyes. So as soon as you go past 45, you're getting to quite like almost like a steeple.
That's right.
Church-like kind
Yeah.
of. So
Like a 1612, a 1712. Look, those are very steep roofs.
Do you happen to know offhand, like the Comstock styles, like how steep are they?
I don't off the top of my head.
Like, can you just kind of imagine like what we're looking at? Because are we way off in thinking that they're like something like 12-12?
I think they are.
You know, one of the most pure essences.
Ian, take a mic, please. Thank you.
One of the best, most pure essences of a Carmel house, I think you're right there with me on this one, is on the northwest corner of 3rd and Guadalupe. You know those houses, Doug?
Yeah, the old Jocelyn house.
Is that what that is? Really?
3rd and
Jocelyn? Oh, wow. Anyway, it's very, very prominent, very steep roofs, and just magnificently charming Carmel-by-the-Sea houses. So,
Any guesses on geometry?
well, just they're hella steep.
Let's put that in there.
They're close to that. I mean, they are close to that 45-degree, 12-12 pitch. I think they could be a little more, they could be a little bit less, but they're certainly steeper than what the guidelines currently limit people to is between a 412 and they don't limit, but they really guide towards the 412 and the 612. I mean, that's 3 different roof pitches that you can have, and that's where we hear these complaints from designers, and when you combine that with the volumetrics, that's also a math number. That's how you're starting to see this sort of reproduced volume, because there's an equation that you can put together between the roof pitch and the volume for the house that maximizes the square footage. And as we know, we've heard people come and talk about, because property values are so high, because the homes are so valuable here, it's we live in a capitalistic society. People are going to try to max out that house to make it as high value for resale as possible. That's just a fact. And so
also just to live.
well, yeah, just to live, that's true. But I mean, the reality is that people are trying to max out the building envelope a lot of times because it makes it the most valuable home.
Yeah, highest and best use.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I look at these, I look at all of these, and what I think is the 4 and 12 and 6 and 12, they're nice for a certain type of architecture, but the thing of it is we don't want the same roof. I'm so tired of seeing, squattier and squattier roofs, and that's, it's not interesting, it's monotonous. And
Let's take a straw poll on your point right there, because I think that this is a dam that's about to break. I think that
Yeah.
the 412, 612 is just something we put in there 25 years ago. It seems to have caused problems. I think maybe we don't here's Brandon, do we need anything about pitch?
I don't. Well, here's if where we go with the bulk plane or 3D building envelope, whatever we're going to call it. If we go where I think we're going to go with that, then no, because that's going to control what you can build. The only reason I would say yes is if the community feels that there is a specific type of roof pitch that looks inappropriate for the village. I would say then we would want to create a limit. But if we don't feel that there's a specific type of roof pitch that looks inappropriate for the village, then I would say we don't need any mention of the roof pitches at all.
Brandon, you hit on something that I was going to bring up at the end of the meeting. We had that wonderful presentation on bulk plane.
Volume.
And, yeah, as opposed to volumetrics. And we said, well, you know, sometimes, given the lot, maybe volumetrics is better. I mean, I think we really need to talk about this, because we're going through the document and we're not talking about bulk plane, which some of us really thought was a very good idea, and, yeah, and had some great potential. And yet we haven't really gone back to discussing that. And I think that when we talk about roofs and trying to get to what I consider to be a more creative attitude toward roof forms, you know, then it's important for us to be talking about that. Where is a place that we're going to insert that idea or opportunity for people to do bulk plane planning, site planning and so forth, as opposed to volumetrics?
So we'll get to that when we talk about zoning code, because the bulk plane stuff lives in the zoning code, would live in the zoning code. So we are working on, so staff is working with Nori to, you know, sort of like smooth out the mechanics of it. So we got great feedback from you all when we had that conversation. So we are continuing to work on the bulk plane concept. You really, like, you have to be careful when you do it. There's, every place you put it is different. Every city is different. And so we're just working on the mechanics right now. So it's still in process. It's something we're working on, and we will bring it back at some point when we're talking about the zoning code.
I think the request is, yeah, that we see it earlier than that if we could, because it helps, if we're gonna take out pitch at 5.3.5, I can imagine a little diagram that says, and in fact, we could leave the first line, proportion roof forms to the scale of the building. That's
Yeah.
fine. And then, you know, this whole section is about human scale, about the bulk of the building, modesty and restraint or simplicity. So something that indicates to people as a preview, here's how we handle size. This is how we handle and distribute height. And then it has the link to the zoning code that explains it, et cetera. I think not having that in this document would be such a strange omission, and that doesn't have to be in detail.
Yeah.
But just some reference to it, maybe a little image of what were we calling it? Inner, oh my gosh, we had a better term. It was like inner volume, but it wasn't volumetrics. Or maybe it was exterior massing or
I'll have to
something
go back
like
to
that.
my notes.
I'll
Yeah.
look at that. I'll look
Yeah.
at it. But whatever we decide to call it, some indication that we actually have a way to handle this that's in this document, I think is what Melanie's saying, and I agree.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you.
David?
I just wanted to be clear, because if we go back to, I guess this is page 16. It says limit flat roofs to one-story structures or set back from the public view. So are we wanting them to not have any restriction on flat roofs? Yeah, because in that it says if it's set back, so if you did like a garage in the front, but that was flat and the next part was flat back, it was set back from public view.
Well, this is already more limited than what we have now. You realize that. This proposal from the draft of the February is, I think, a response to folks, top of page 16, across the year, saying we got to do something about flat roofs. This is a limitation that I don't think was in the 25 years ago. I could be wrong.
Well, in the past,
I think it's
it
in
used
the
to say
25
it
year
was
ago.
only
You do think it's
for-
25 year ago?
It was only for single story. So that's what.
Oh, you
it
think
said.
that setback from public view is actually an addition?
Yeah, it's like adding.
For this
so
draft.
The second floor can now be flat roof too, and now that we've changed that, we don't have to have any pitches, which, you know, I'm arguing for. You know, we can have whatever we want, but now it really opens up the situation to having very tall, flat roof buildings.
So I have seen two-story flat roof buildings in town in the front. So I'm assuming that that's allowed now, and that this is a restriction. But am I wrong? Maybe I'm making the wrong assumption.
The flat roofed building that I brought to everyone's attention, that is referred to as brutalism style, it has a higher level flat roof as well, above the lower level flat roof. I haven't looked at the interior architecture though, and I'm not sure if it is actually two-story or a really tall one-story. So I have to look at that. Let me show you.
There's a two-story flat. Two-story flat roof house on 10th at Casanova,
10th and Casanova.
which was built in the 70s.
Two-story flat roof.
Well, maybe we can just get the feedback from folks what they want, because I can't remember off the top of my head where, what's from 25 years ago and what's in last, but what are people thinking about this? I guess
About flat roofs. I
yeah.
mean, obviously, I think some folks would say 0 flat roofs, so we
Mm-hmm.
really have to come to some kind of acceptable consensus about this. Yes. 10th and Casanova? I can try.
I think this thing is off now. I want to turn it off.
And did it die?
Did it die?
It might have
You've got
died.
the stapler here, though.
The stapler.
All right, so I think that I think absolutely forbidding flat roofs is the wrong way to go. I think we do need to, again, you get to the Carl Cherry Center, which is a flat roof and is a magnificent building and utterly appropriate to Carmel-by-the-Sea. But there are, it again gets down to, yeah, I know that place.
It's an old
Right.
building.
Yeah, so anyway, it's, I think allowing flexibility and discretion, I wouldn't forbid them outright. I wouldn't forbid any particular
Don't
roof
forbid
pitch
anything.
out. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, but I think it gets down again to, underlying qualities. I guess roof pitch is a quality, but, how is it manifesting in a particular given design, because it can be done well and it can be done poorly.
So what do we think about this phrasing, setback from public, so limit flat roofs to one-story structures or setback from public view? So is there mediating language that would help prevent things that we don't want to see?
So is saying with roof
Would you
style,
pass
we
her the
don't want a
stapler?
boxy look?
Wait.
With this roof style point, is it that we're really trying to say we don't want a boxy look, which kind of connotes to industrial-ish looking, as long as those factors don't apply to the treatment, then we're good? I don't know how to say that more eloquently, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying we could take it up in another part of the code, of the guidelines, to make sure that certain things don't happen. I don't know if there's any restriction. I mean, Ian's saying basically, don't limit the roofs in this clause, I think is almost what you're saying, and then we can deal with it someplace else. Maybe this doesn't get at it. Limit flat roofs to one-story structures as set back from public view. Any other thoughts on this one?
I can't believe I'm saying this, but, I think there are times when a flat roof is appropriate, and maybe we just want to discourage flat roofs, except, and I think there are exceptions where it just makes sense.
Like what? Tell me what you're thinking.
Oh, I'm thinking of a garage or carport setback from view, or a flat roof portion of a Spanish style on the top. There are some styles that can accommodate a flat roof and not look boxy or, industrial or whatever we want to call it. So I'd hate to say just no flat roofs.
So maybe this goes back to this placeholder we still have for under 4.0, talking about style in a way that gets to the problem better. And yeah, so let's again, I'm gonna, in my mind, think of that as a 4.0 issue for now, and it might end up being somewhere here too. But let's I think we've said what we can on that at the moment, and before we fix that other thing, we're not gonna know, I think, if we've got things right or not.
But otherwise, I think it's wonderful to, encourage steeper roofs.
So I think that's a consensus that I have never heard anyone protest about since this year began. So I think we're moving toward flexibility in that, and Brandon's going to help us through this, through this massing tool that we can't remember the name of. This is also the page, by the way, at 16 that's about, and we have only 10 minutes left. So I'm going to guess that we are not going to get to 6. Or commercial, so that's still a chunk. So we will do that. This may be our record-setting 4th continuation. If we want.
Are we in a big rush here? I feel like we're kind of rushing.
Well, no, I don't mean to rush anyone. I think partly there seem to me to be things that we probably can't fix at the table in one day. And so I am using a little bit of judgment, but please slow me down if you want.
It's not a criticism of you.
No,
it's
it's okay.
Generally speaking, is there a date by which we have to have something together? This is more of a Brandon question, I think.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's actually a yes and no answer. So we don't have a specific date that we have to have something done by. We know that Nori's contract is over, end of June, early July. And he's moving on to other things. He's going to be teaching, and he's got actually other work to do. So one of the things that does have sort of a deadline on it is we need to at least, because Nori's helping with the guidelines. So all these other things that we're talking about working on, like the landscaping ordinance, those don't necessarily have to be adopted at the same time that these are. It'd be nice if it is, but our focus is to get the guidelines at least to a final draft that we're starting to go through the adoption hearing process. So we still have a lot of work left to do. We've got community meetings, redrafting, all that stuff. And so we want to try to make sure we can keep Nori for that. So to that end, like June, July, we need to at least have a final draft that everyone at least is aware of and has mostly had a chance to weigh in on, that we're taking forward for consideration at the city. So that's the only real timeline we've got. I mean, ideally, we'd like to start having a community meeting on this first draft that the city put together in the next month or so. So we want to get through this process here with the steering committee on the drafts and these thoughts, somewhat expeditiously, but we're not trying to cut off any comments or anything. We want to get as much feedback as we can.
So one question that comes up in my mind is, if we're not going to be providing the public with like a revised, reorganized document, we're going to be expecting them to read 100 pages of residential.
Well, we're going to use, I mean, that's one of the things we need to develop out of this is what do we need to get out of the community when we have a bigger community meeting? That draft's been on the street now for about a month, a little over a month. And we'll, when we start getting ready to have that community meeting like we've done before, we send out pre-materials, we send out workbooks to help guide people through what we need to get out of them. It would be wonderful.
Will they finalize this too?
That's up to the steering committee. We're going to talk about how this relates to the draft and what we're trying to ask the community for. I mean, obviously, we're not doing all this work just to put it away.
Right,
this is,
right.
I don't know if that's where, I think it's kind of where your question's coming from. Is like, no, this isn't just a fun exercise. Like, we're not spending 4 or 5 meetings on this just to not do anything with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excuse me, just a clarification. Are the changes that we're making in this, will they be reflected in a draft for the public, or is the public just going to see what we saw in the beginning?
That's what I was just answering, is that we haven't
sorry,
really worked.
I didn't understand.
We haven't really worked that out yet. So
Okay.
what we need to figure out is, the city prepared a draft, paid for a draft by our consultant. We haven't gotten feedback on that draft from the broader community yet. We've gotten feedback on that draft from our 5 steering committee members and the 8 people that have shown up to this meeting. So this hasn't really been a broad representation of the entire community. We're hopeful that the bigger community will come out to a bigger meeting at the Sunset Center. Everybody gets invited to this, but you guys are the only dedicated ones that actually come. So we're going to have to figure out a way to communicate all the work that we've done here over the last 3, 4, 5 meetings to the community in that bigger community meeting. Here's the draft the city put out. Here's some of the pre-work that was done by the steering committee and those people that showed up. Now tell us what you think. So I don't know, we haven't worked out how to communicate this yet. So I don't know if it's just handing them this and saying, what do you think? I don't think that's a really productive way to do it. I think we need to explain the nexus between the two and what this was meant to do as an exercise. So we as a steering committee group and Nori are gonna have to figure out how we ask those questions at the community meeting. But that's how we develop, like the last community workshops we've done. we developed questions ahead of time to do what we wanted to do. So that's the next step after this.
Are those questions going to be something that the steering committee is going to have a chance to review before it's brought to the public?
Yeah, I feel like you're not listening to me. So the steering committee and I will work on putting together those questions for the community, yeah.
Awesome.
Brandon, thank you so much for that explanation, because I was gonna ask it.
Well, we've
Yeah.
all, I guess it's on everyone's mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's, just as an exercise, really quick, in 5 minutes, I know this is crazy, but I just want to, have the satisfaction of moving to being ready to talk about 6 when we get back. Now, that doesn't mean we can't come back and keep recycling, but I just want to point out 2 things. On 5.4.4, this is just a clarifying remark that I added sort of as an architect, with my architect hat on. We always talk about not oversizing openings, grand entries, grand windows, all that sorts of things. Just to clarify that, I put, do not use expanses of glass that require more recent structural technology on more traditional architectural styles. So what that means, just to be clear, is when you see a mission-style building that has an enormous out of scale, and that has happened here. The reason mission-style buildings have small openings is that those were built out of clay and local materials that couldn't have large spans. So that's why our styles look the way they do, because they have a historic structural imperative to them. So when that structural imperative is deviated from, then it looks funny to the eye. It looks out of the style. So I just added that as a clarification, but that's not really my main thing I wanted to get to. It's the colors. So if we go to 5.5.0, I highly suspect, see this, avoid highly contrasting color schemes? That is actually not added language. That is italicized for a totally different reason. I apologize. It's to make sure that I brought it up with you folks, because I believe it is a reaction, as Brandon just previewed, to the black and white that's prevailing. However, Melanie and I were talking about this, so I wanted to figure out if we're phrasing it the way to get where we want to go. I think there was a building that she and I were looking at, maybe it was an example building in Nori's original draft that had like maybe a natural dark brown uncoated shingle exterior and a white trim. Oh, look, I didn't even realize that. City Hall is an example. So
Those are not highly contrast. I think I get you're saying then, because we have to define that better, because that's not white and that's not dark brown.
Right.
So they're not highly contrasting.
No, I'm thinking, imagine yourself at the outside of this building,
Yeah.
or similar buildings that have aged with a beautiful dark brown patina, almost black patina in the forest, that then have sometimes a bright white trim. Sometimes we find that charming. So I just want to make sure that when we are saying avoid highly contrasting color schemes, that we are getting the result we want, which may be this proliferation of a particular style that is not very foresty, potentially. So there's no language here, although I think it shows up maybe in the commercial district, or maybe it's in 6, about the forest palette. Maybe that was something you and I discussed, and I didn't put it in yet. But, a forest palette or any, I just want to draw our attention to that. We don't have to resolve it right now in the next 3 minutes, but.
Maybe give an example,
Go ahead,
e.g.
Dave.
black and white.
Yeah.
I think, if you add a little bit of cream into the white, it kind of makes a big difference. But I think what that's really leading us to is the word stark. So when we look up stark colors, we see what we're talking about. We see the colors that just are not appropriate for our community. They're just, they're stark.
Well, bright, that you're showing me bright colors, I would say. So that's
But
in
if you show,
5.5.1.
I mean, like this, that's stark. See the white, how it's stark?
Yes. And it's hard on the eyes.
Well, there are some traditional styles, and I'll let Ian take over here, that have been here forever, that are little colonial type of buildings that are always very simple board and batten, always white. So I just want to, again, we're getting at something, but I'm not sure we're doing it here with this language. Okay, Ian, go ahead.
Yeah. quick homework assignment, this is another house I know Carol will love. It's the cottage at the corner of Mountain View and 8th Avenue. It's opposite the Forest Theater. It's splendid, magnificent house. Brown shingle, brown wood siding, turquoise trim, and it's beautifully done. And I think that one of the reasons why it works so well, and actually I think that the current iteration of the design guidelines speak to this, where you use earth tones for the overall things, but you can use colored trim. That's a splendid example of how that works really well. But I think what makes a color scheme work well in our forested context is that, if it's behind some trees, are you distracted from seeing the trees, right? Again, the color scheme should help buildings subordinate to the forest, right? Kind of help it blend with the forest, and you can use some colorful details around trim and whatnot, but overall the building should fall back and subordinate to the forested, naturalistic character of the village.
And Melanie came up with some language, and I have to say, I don't think it made it into this pass. I apologize, but it was around that, the forest palette idea.
Yeah, and the turquoise trim, I think, has some history to it, some Indian history to it.
Just one thing, I think from my point of view, in my neighborhood, just in a very short block, there.
Oh, sorry.
In my neighborhood, in a very short block, because of this kind of Architectural Digest color scheme that's floating around every place, there are five, in one short block, 5 white houses. And in my, in my broader neighborhood, I can't even tell you how many there are. I mean, it's beyond my counting. And so what that translates into is, if you have 1, that can be stark, but if you have 5, that's like way out of whack. And these houses get approved with these color schemes, and it seems like no one's looking at what's happening in the block or in the neighborhood, and they're definitely not forest friendly, and I can't understand how people would want to have the same color house that other people in the block have in such close proximity to each other. And to me, it looks like, it looks like they thought, oh, this is wonderful. It's from Greece, or it's from, Cape Cod or someplace else that can have that kind of, color scheme because it's traditional for them. I mean, it's not traditional for us. It never has been, that you would have so many white houses.
Can I
Yes.
make a suggestion?
Yes.
Because I think there's a place to handle this. If you guys go back to page 10, 3.4.0, vary the design of a new building from the nearby and abutting properties. We talk about building materials being various, but we don't talk about color. It's possible that what we're reacting to here is everybody's doing it. And that goes against the whole thing we've been talking about this whole time about uniformity. If one of these buildings had shown up in town, we probably all would have loved it, seriously. And maybe 2 or 3. But then what Melanie is pointing out, if 5 show up on the same block, well, we are actually undermining the design of a new building, but we're not being clear about how that applies to color also. So I'm going to put a 3.4.2 or add something about color here, and then we can come back to this next meeting and talk about how the end of 5, whether it's achieving what we wanted to achieve or not. Highly contrasted, and the aqua trim and the forest theater and all those ways to accent the forest. I think we can come back to that.
Well, there's 2 new houses, Lincoln Street.
Mike.
Right next door to each other, they're both white.
Yeah. That would be odd. I cannot imagine Carmel, like, if a whole block was white. That would be odd. but it might not be that we're reacting to the white, because there have always been white buildings in town. I am quite certain of that. Bright white.
Not white in and of itself.
Yes, it's not,
But I
that's not the
think
issue.
white was,
I know a lavender one that's nice.
I think white was predominantly on Spanish-style buildings.
And there was like a,
Right.
One suggestion, I remember
Yes,
last meeting, somebody
Stephen.
had mentioned that it'd be good to have some things that are sort of recommended. And rather than saying what's not allowed, just say, these are palettes that the city, some options like.
that's a very
That-
good
that works.
comment. I'm writing down pallets now that you said that.
People always like options,
Yes.
and then
I'm writing
more
that down in the,
pre-approved options.
I'm writing that down in the appendix area where we had this idea for this preferred stuff. And I see Neil has his hand up, and then we're already past 12 by 4 minutes, but I'm going to let Neil have the last word. And then we're going to continue the meeting, yeah? And this will be the record-setting fourth, unless Brandon has a preference of re-noticing something else.
We can continue it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Neil, go ahead. Or no, maybe he doesn't, maybe he gave up. Okay, so then we will adjourn or continue, sorry, not adjourn. And Brandon, tell me what works for you.
Time next
Yes,
week?
let's do it.
About tonight.
Doug, the answer is no.
No.
Absolutely not.
We did make good progress. I don't want people to be discouraged. We got through a fairly large
I think
chunk.
one more of these meetings, because we've got it.
Yeah.
I would venture to say we can get through what's left in residential and the whole commercial thing in one more meeting.
I think that's possible. I agree.
think that would be a good goal to set. for
I
that.
agree.
Another 3-hour session, perhaps next Thursday from 9 to noon again.
Thursday?
All right, let me look.
It's farmer's market.
I know, it's so sad to me, although it was canceled this week.
Oh,
I don't know about next Thursday.
It's supposed to
Yeah,
be
next Thursday.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
good Lord.
okay.
So.
9 to 12, Thursday the 16th, right?
Go.
Tuesday or Wednesday,
You can't?
Brandon? Does that, do either one of those?
That's gonna be hard for me. I've got the special planning commission meeting on Wednesday for the wireless ordinance.
No,
I'm gonna be getting ready for all week.
What about
And
Friday?
I've got a city council special meeting on Tuesday, the 14th, so no, the soonest I can do it is Thursday.
So
What
let me
about
just,
Friday the
I have
17th?
Thursday and Friday morning currently, I have things I need to do, but I could potentially change those around. So I don't know if the afternoons of either of those things are available,
Yeah.
Thursday or
Afternoon
Friday
would be
afternoon?
great.
Yeah,
Afternoon would be great.
Afternoon would be great for David. Anybody else on Thursday or Friday afternoon?
Thursday afternoon would be great for me. I cannot, Friday, I'm out of town Friday.
Thursday afternoon, Brandon, what do you think?
So that's what I'm looking at. We're doing the mock city council thing with our Carmel High School students on Thursday.
Oh, here.
Okay, that's not
Yeah.
good.
But that's not till 7.
Oh,
But
Oh.
I'm just
Trying
trying
to-
to actually have some time.
yeah. Well, what about, yeah, I mean, if we started at early afternoon, like noon
1.
or 1?
Yeah, one.
Would that be enough of a
1 to
breather?
4 on Thursday.
Yeah?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's good.
Okay.
Okay, people like that. I hope that works in the Zoom room. So we're talking about
Yeah,
Thursday the
16th.
16th at 1.
1 to 4.
And our stated goal is to get
Is to
through the rest
go
of
through
it.
the rest of it, yes.
Hopefully, we have enough time to talk about maybe some strategies of how we can then move these along to the community meeting so that they ride along with the draft. But
And-
I'd appreciate some feedback on that, because it's gonna be a difficult task, so.
It is going to be difficult. And I also think, please take note of what we thought we were going to table a little bit for deeper thought. And do that in your own time if you have the time, the devoted ones out there of us. Because it will help us maybe come to some resolution for recommendations around the table.
And I think some of those deeper philosophical conversations are gonna be the most important to make sure we carry through to the community meeting, so we can get feedback from the broader audience on that stuff.
By the 15th.
Thank you, everybody.
Or we could meet sometime.